He knows how to say 12 words. He can't read. He doesn't understand why people need shiny, odorless discs. Yet with just a handful of roots, he lifts a girl from her bed, a girl whom the capital's healers had given up on 6 months ago. And now the entire empire is searching for the savage from the forest. It all began at dawn. From beneath the black crowns of the devouring forest, a barefoot youth clad in a wyvern pelt steps out onto a sun-drenched wheat field. 16 years old. Around his neck is a necklace made of the teeth of creatures that imperial bestiaries still consider a figment of the imagination. An old white scar stretches across his face. His eyes are the color of a winter sky, not cold, empty, like a well into which you throw a stone and cannot hear the bottom. No one has returned from this forest in 300 years. Heroes went into the thicket for glory and an SSS rank contract. Their bones became fertilizer for the roots. But this boy simply walked out, alive. And the grass parts before him of its own accord. The stalks bend aside like dogs making way for their leader. Eris doesn't even notice. For him, this is normal.
That's what any grass does when someone walks by.
His name is Eris Grimm. He took his last name in honor of his mother, and his mother is the ancient Fenrir Grimwald, a being older than the church, older than borders, older than human language, a creature the priests whisper about when they think the children are asleep. Fenrir picked him up on the 3rd day after his birth, or rather swallowed him, and then spat him out. And for 16 years, he nursed him in the belly of the continent, amid claws, fangs, and a roar that shatters rocks. Eris isn't a stranger from another world. He's a stranger back in his own, from the world of beasts to the world of humans. And the first thing he sees here is neat rows of wheat. Someone has combed the earth with a rake. Why? The earth doesn't like being combed. It likes being listened to. The wind carries scents, smoke, fat, sour milk, and fear. A great deal of fear. The whole village beyond the field reeks of fear. Mom used to say that people are soft beasts who have forgotten how tasty they are. Eris steps onto the path. A peasant is pushing a cart toward him. Eris turns and smiles, as best he can. That is, he bares his teeth. All teeth out, more fangs than a human should have. The wyvern's hide glistens in the sun. The necklace clinks dully against his chest. The peasant turns pale. He drops the reins. Eris takes a step and utters the first human word he learned from his mother. Salt. Slowly, carefully, like a child learning to speak. Because that is exactly what he is, a child. 16 years among beasts do not foster eloquence. His mother taught him exactly 12 words. Salt, water, no, yes, fire, it hurts, thank you, meat, friend, enemy, mom. And a name. It was enough for the forest. It turned out to be too little for the human world. The peasant doesn't answer. The peasant falls. His eyes roll back. The smell of fear hits his nose so sharply that Eris recoils. He sits down nearby and waits. He knows how to wait. In the forest, you sometimes sit by a watering hole for 3 days until the prey comes to you. The peasant comes to his senses after 15 minutes. He sees Eris. He passes out again. By the 3rd time, Eris has already backed away 10 paces. The peasant jumps up, grabs his cart, and races toward the village faster than he's run since his youth. Eris is upset, genuinely. He didn't do anything wrong. He just wanted salt. Mom told him to. Mom is tired of eating meat without salt. And when Mom grumbles, the trees within a kilometer lose their leaves. Eris heads toward the village, Birchwood. He doesn't know the names. He can't read. To him, it's just a cluster of smells. A tree, clay, fat, flour, fear. People watch him from behind fences, from windows, from cracks in doors. No one comes out. The houses stand straight, like wheat. People like straight rows too. Why? In the forest, straight means dead. Only dead trees stand straight. The living always reach for the light. He goes where the smell of food is strongest. A tavern. He walks in. 3 people at the tables freeze. The innkeeper drops his rag. Eris approaches the bar. Salt. The innkeeper looks at the hide, at the necklace, at the scar, at the eyes that don't blink. Eris doesn't know how to blink like a human. In the forest, blinking means you're weak. Weak means you've been eaten. The innkeeper swallows. He reaches under the counter, pulls out a small bag of salt. Eris takes it, sniffs it, nods. It's real salt. He knows that smell. His mother used to find chunks of rock salt in deep caves and let him lick them. The best food in the world. After meat. And after the warm blood of a fawn on a winter morning. Eris turns toward the exit. The innkeeper shouts after him that the salt costs 2 copper coins. Eris freezes. He doesn't know the word copper. The innkeeper shows him the coins, small, round, shiny. Eris steps closer, takes one, sniffs it, twirls it between his fingers. Not food, not a weapon, not a tool. It smells of metal and other people's hands. What use is it to him? He puts the coin back. He removes a tooth from his necklace, a manticore's milk fang. He places it on the counter. That's how they traded in the forest. You give a bone, you get passage, or food, or silence. This tooth is worth more than the entire inn, more than the whole village. The innkeeper doesn't know this. He just wants the young man to leave. So he nods. Eris goes out, with the salt. The first task is complete. He sits down on the porch, unfolds the little bag, licks the salt, squints. The taste of home, the taste of the cave, the taste of his mother's breath when she leaned over him at night to check if he was alive. Every night, 16 years. An ancient beast capable of splitting a mountain with a swipe of its tail. Every night it sniffed the sleeping boy and counted his size. Eris licks the salt and doesn't understand why his face is wet. He touches his cheek. Water. The sky is clear, no rain. He looks at his fingers. Wet, salty. They're tears. He doesn't know what they are. He never cried once in the forest. There was no reason. Mom was nearby. The pack was nearby. But now there is neither Mom nor the pack. There is him. A little bag of salt. A village full of fear. And 1,000 kilometers to home. He wipes his face. He stands up. He sniffs the air. And then, from the tavern, comes a smell he wasn't expecting. Illness. Severe. Old. Not contagious. Something else. Something hollow. As if a thread had been pulled from a living body and it had begun to unravel at the seams. Eris knows this smell. This is how beasts smell when their mana is draining away. Mom called it the silent death. He returns to the inn. He points upward. The smell is coming from the 2nd floor. The innkeeper turns pale. His daughter is lying upstairs, 9 years old. She's been sick for 6 months. Healers from the capital came twice. They threw up their hands. Mana won't take root in her body. The girl is melting away like a candle in an empty room. Eris races up the stairs. He enters. The girl is on the bed, thin, pale, barely breathing. He leans down, sniffs her breath, sniffs her neck behind her ear. He straightens up. Yes, he knows this case. It smells like Siren when a stone was stuck in her throat. Siren is a chimera he's known since childhood. She swallowed a mana crystal, and the stone got stuck in her throat, blocking the flow. Siren was choking for 3 days, until her mother showed her which root to dig up and how to brew it. Eris runs out into the yard. He sniffs the air. An apple tree grows by the north wall. He finds it by the scent right away, the one by the north wall specifically. The roots from the south won't do. Mom explained why. Something about how the earth rotates and where the sap flows. He doesn't remember the explanation. He remembers the rule. The north wall. 3 roots. No more, no less. He digs them up with his bare hands. The earth gives way easily. It always gives way to him easily, as if it knows what he needs. He gestures for a cast iron pot and water.
The innkeeper gives them without asking. Eris boils it for 10 minutes. He stirs with his finger. His finger isn't hot. His skin is used to things far worse than boiling water. He throws in a pinch of salt. That very salt, his mother's. It's cold. He stands up, lifts the girl's head, feeds her the broth by the spoonful. She swallows, weakly, but she swallows. Eris sits beside her until evening. Then he collapses onto the floor and falls asleep instantly, just like in the forest. One breath and sleep. Only the dead fall asleep slowly. In the morning, the girl opens her eyes. She looks at the sleeping young man on the floor and says she wants to eat, for the first time in 6 months. The innkeeper hears this from downstairs. He drops his mug. He flies up the stairs 3 steps at a time. His daughter is sitting there. Her eyes are open. Her cheeks are slightly pink. The innkeeper falls to his knees. Eris wakes up. He looks at the girl. He nods. The smell of illness has faded. In a week, it will be gone completely. He knows. Siren recovered in a week back then, too. The innkeeper offers him everything: food, a room, money, everything he has. Eris looks at him for a long time. Then he speaks, choosing each word slowly.
You don't have what I need. I need a map to the place where the people who make patterned iron live. He's talking about the blacksmiths in the capital. Mom gave me a list: salt, a whetstone, thread, and a knife worthy of a man, not a beast. The innkeeper draws a map on a scrap of cloth. Eris can't read, but he understands maps. A map is the earth drawn from above, and the earth is the same in any language. Eris takes the cloth. He nods. He leaves. An hour later, all of Birchwood knows. A savage from the forest, in animal skins, with teeth around his neck. He cured Olt's daughter, just like that, with roots. What the capital's healers couldn't do. The rumor spreads along the road. By evening, they're talking about him in the neighboring village. By morning, in Linden, 100 kilometers away. By the end of the week, the first report lands on the desk of the Junior Secretary of Imperial Intelligence. A young man, 16 years old. He came out of the Devourer's forest, not a mana-bearer. Heals illnesses related to the Wither. The secretary reads the report 3 times. Twice he thinks it's a prank. On the 3rd time, he sends a request up the chain, marked urgent. Meanwhile, Eris is walking along the road north, barefoot, with a small bag of salt on his belt. The world seems strange to him. The roads are smooth. The trees stand alone, not in a wall. The birds aren't trying to kill him. Nothing is trying to kill him. It's suspicious. In the forest, if they aren't trying to eat you, it means they've already eaten you and you just haven't noticed yet. The mana in the air is thin, almost transparent. In the forest, it was thick as honey. Here, it's like dew. He walks and thinks about his mom, about how she's sleeping right now, curled up around her tail. How Uncle Crow is fighting with Uncle Vis again over territory by the stream. How Tyr, the fox cub he raised himself, is whimpering and searching for him by scent. Eris squeezes the little bag of salt. Mom said, "Come back as a human and don't disgrace the pack." He'll come back. He definitely will. But first he has to find the iron with the patterns and figure out why people wear so much fabric and why they need those round, shiny things that don't smell of anything. Ahead on the horizon are the roofs of Linden, the first city of his life. Eris stops, sniffs the air. The city smells like an anthill. Thousands of scents, thousands of creatures. And they're all afraid, each in their own way. Mom was right. People really are soft animals. He walks on. Linden turned out to be 10 times bigger than Birchwood. Eris stood at the gate and tried to count the houses, lost count after 40. In the forest, he could count to 40. That's the word Mom called mini began. They were mini here. Walls of gray stone, a bell tower, a market from which the smells of sweat, fish, and fried dough wafted. And people. He had never seen so many people at once. They moved chaotically, jostling, shouting, waving their arms. Eris stood in the stream of people and tried to understand the logic of the movement. There was no logic. Even a herd of wild boars in the forest moved with more purpose. At least they had a leader. Here there was no leader. Everyone went wherever they wanted. It seemed like madness. Someone shoved him with their shoulder. Eris reflexively grabbed the man by the wrist. The man yelped. Eris's fingers tightened like a vice. He didn't mean to hurt him.
It was just that in the forest, a shove meant a challenge. If you shove, it means you want to fight. A simple rule. The man jerked away. He yelled. Eris let go. He looked at his hand. He looked at the man. The man was rubbing his wrist and cursing. Eris didn't understand the words, but the scent was clear. Fear and anger. A strange combination. In the forest, those who are angry aren't afraid. Those who are afraid aren't angry. Here, people managed to do both at the same time. Surprising. Eris walked on, down the main street toward the city center. He was looking for a blacksmith. The map on the cloth showed that there was a workshop in Linden. Not a capital city one, of course, but it would do for a start. He sniffed the air, looking for the smell of red-hot iron and coals. He found it quickly. The smithy stood at the intersection of two streets. Smoke was coming from the chimney. It smelled right. Eris went inside. The blacksmith was a large man with scorched hands. He was forging a horseshoe. Eris stood in the doorway and watched, for a long time. The blacksmith didn't notice him for 3 minutes. Then he turned around. He saw him. He flinched. Eris spoke a single word. Knife.
The blacksmith looked at him. Eris made a gesture with his hand. A cutting motion. Knife. The blacksmith understood. He pointed to the wall where the finished blades hung. Eris walked over. He took one down. He turned it over. He sniffed the blade. He tested it on his fingernail. The blade slid right off and didn't even leave a mark. Eris put the knife back. He took another one. Same thing. A third. A fourth. All the knives were dull. Not by human standards, by his standards. The knife he used to butcher his prey in the forest was made from a shard of Fenrir's fang. That knife cut through stone like butter. These knives wouldn't even cut through the hide of a young wyvern. Eris put down the last knife and looked at the blacksmith with an expression the blacksmith interpreted as deep disappointment. The blacksmith took offense. His family had been making these knives for 3 generations, the best in Linden. Eris didn't know what offense was. He was simply stating a fact. Bad knife. Need a good one. He took a fragment of scale out of his belt pouch, a small one, about the size of a thumbnail. The scale was black with a green sheen. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. Eris placed the scale on the anvil. He said one word. This. The blacksmith leaned over. He touched the scale. It was warm, as if alive, and absolutely indestructible. The blacksmith tried it with a hammer. The anvil cracked. The scale remained intact. The blacksmith sat down on the floor. He looked at Eris. He looked at the scale, then at Eris again. It was a scale from a leviathan, an SS rank creature, material from which one could forge a weapon capable of piercing a castle wall. A single shard was worth the duchy's annual budget. Eris didn't know that. To him, it was a scrap from his mother's dining table. Leviathan came to visit his mother once a season and always left scales on the floor, just like a dog sheds fur. Eris collected them in a little bag, like children collecting seashells on the shore. He collected the scales of ancient creatures. The blacksmith stood up. His hands were shaking. He said he couldn't work with this material. He had neither the tools nor the knowledge. Eris understood. A bad blacksmith with bad knives can't make a good knife. Logical. He took the scales, nodded, went out. A surprise awaited him on the street. A caravan of 5 wagons stood at the crossroads. The horses were nervous. They sensed Eris and didn't understand exactly what they were sensing, but they didn't like it. A merchant stood near the front wagon and was arguing with the guards. The guards were pointing toward the southern road and shook their heads. Eris sniffed the air. A scent was coming from the south, heavy, hot, sour. A manticore, an adult, hungry. It was 3 kilometers away and heading toward the city. A manticore is serious business. In the imperial bestiaries, it was listed as a B rank. Wings, a poisonous tail, fangs capable of biting through chainmail. For the guild hunters, a manticore was a worthwhile contract. For Eris, a manticore was a childhood memory. One of them had played with him when he was 3. He called her Aunt Mill. Aunt Mill loved it when someone scratched her behind the ear. This manticore was a stranger, not from his forest, smaller, weaker, and very hungry. A hungry beast is dangerous not because it is strong, but because it is foolish with hunger. Eris walked south along the road. He just walked, bare, unarmed. The caravan guards watched his back and didn't know what to think. The merchant shouted after him that it was dangerous out there. Eris didn't turn around. It's dangerous when Mom plays in the rain and the trees fall. One manticore isn't dangerous. It's boring. He found her half a kilometer from the road. She was standing on a hill, sniffing the air. Big, 2 meters at the withers, wings folded, tail with a stinger swaying. Eris stepped out into the open. He stood up. He looked her in the eyes. The manticore froze. Eris didn't move. He just stood there and watched. The manticore growled, low, deep. Eris didn't look away. The growl subsided. The manticore lowered its head, slowly, as if an invisible stone had been placed on its neck. Lower, lower, until its nose touched the ground. Eris stepped closer, reached out his hand, placed his palm on its muzzle. The manticore closed its eyes. Eris scratched it behind the ear, just like Aunt Mill used to. The creature purred, deeply, long and drawn out, like a huge cat. Eris stood there for a minute. Then he told her in the language of beasts, not with words, with his body, the tilt of his head, the pressure of his palm, the movement of his fingers. He told her to leave this place.
It smells of fear and iron here. Go east. There's a forest there. There is food there. The manticore raised its head, looked at him, turned around, spread its wings, and left. It hopped heavily and flew east, low over the trees. Eris returned to the caravan. The guards stood with their swords drawn. The merchant was hiding behind a cart. Eris walked past them, stopped, turned around, said one word, "Gone." And he walked back to the city. The caravan stood still for another 20 minutes. Then one of the guards went down the road to check. There was no manticore, not a trace, not a scent. The merchant caught up with Eris already in the city. He slipped a small bag into his hand, heavy, jingling. Eris opened it. Inside were those very same round, shiny things. Metal, cold, no smell. He looked at the merchant. The merchant said it was a reward for saving the caravan. Eris didn't understand. He hadn't saved the caravan. He'd just told the manticore to go away. The manticore left. What's the reward got to do with it? He tried to give the pouch back. The merchant wouldn't take it. Eris stood there, shrugged, tucked the pouch into his belt. Useless trinkets, but maybe they'll come in handy on the road. Maybe he could throw them at birds. The news spread within an hour. A vagabond from the forest drove away a manticore with his bare hands. No weapons, no magic. He just looked at it, and it left. It was impossible. A B-rank manticore, hunters usually go after it in groups of 5, with artifacts, with training. 3 out of 5 don't come back. And this guy, barefoot, in his pelt, with teeth on his neck. He stood before her as if he were a house cat and scratched behind her ear. Lyndon hummed. By evening, a girl approached Eris. Tall, thin, hair the color of dry grass, hands stained green with plant sap. She smelled of wormwood and mint and something sweet he couldn't quite place. She wasn't afraid. That was the first thing he noticed. Everyone around him smelled of fear, not her. She smelled of curiosity. In the forest, curiosity had its own scent, warm, slightly sour,
like an unripe berry. The girl introduced herself as Sarah Holloway, an herbalist, a local. She said she'd heard about him, about the girl in Birchwood, about the manticore. She asked what he'd used to treat the child. Eris looked at her
For a long time. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn pale. She just stood there and waited for an answer. Eris remembered his mother. His mother used to say that among people there are those who haven't forgotten, who still feel the forest. There are few of them, but they exist. His mother called them the quiet ones. Sarah was a quiet one. Eris sat down on a step by the fountain. He pointed to the spot next to him. Sarah sat, and he began to tell her, slowly, choosing his words carefully, mixing up the order, sometimes replacing words with gestures, about the roots, about the northern wall, about Siren and the lump in her throat. Sarah listened without interrupting. Her eyes grew wider and wider, not out of fear, out of understanding. She was an herbalist. She knew plants, but what Eris was telling her was beyond any textbook. It was the alchemy of the forest, knowledge passed down from the mouths of creatures humanity considered mythical. That evening, for the first time in her life, Sarah Holloway didn't go home on time. She sat on the steps next to the boy in the wyvern skin and jotted down in the margins of her herbarium things that would revolutionize medicine across an entire continent. She didn't know that yet. Eris didn't know either. He was just telling her, because she asked. And her mother had taught her, if someone asks and isn't afraid, it means they deserve an answer. Night fell on Linden. The lamplighter lit the lamps. Eris looked at the fire through the glass. He had never seen street lamps before. In the forest, the light came from mushrooms, huge ones, blue ones. They grew on dead tree trunks and glowed at night like fallen stars. The fire here was yellow and dim and smelled of burnt fat. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm. Sarah stood up. She said he needed a place to sleep. Eris said he didn't need a place. He needed the ground. He could sleep on the ground. Sarah looked at him. She shook her head. She said she had a spare room, or rather, a storage room, but there was a blanket there. Eris didn't know what a blanket was, but he followed her, because she wasn't afraid. And in the forest, you can follow someone who isn't afraid. That's the law. Sarah's storage room smelled of mint and dried flowers and mice. The mice left when Eris lay down on the floor. He didn't chase them away. They left on their own. Small animals always left when he was nearby. Not out of fear, out of respect. In the forest hierarchy, he stood higher than they could imagine. Eris lay on the floor, wrapped in a wyvern pelt. He sniffed the blanket and set it aside. It smelled of strangers, too many strangers. He couldn't sleep in a stranger's scent. The pelt smelled of home, the smoke from his mother's cave, moss, blood, safety. He closed his eyes and fell asleep in 2 breaths. The morning began with the smell of food. Sarah was cooking in the kitchen. Porridge, milk, bread. Eris didn't recognize any of these smells on their own. Together, they blended into something warm and incomprehensible. He came out. Sarah placed a bowl in front of him. She put a spoon next to it. Eris looked at the spoon. He picked it up, turned it over, brought it to his nose. Cold metal, smooth, curved. Why? He put the spoon back and plunged his hand into the bowl. Sarah stopped him, gently. She took his hand, wiped it, showed him how to hold the spoon. Eris tried again. Crooked, clumsy, like a child given a pencil for the first time. He scooped up some porridge. Half of it fell back out. The other half made it into his mouth. The porridge was hot and bland and strange. In the forest, food was simple. Meat, blood, berries, roots, sometimes fish if Uncle Crow was in the mood to share. Porridge was neither one nor the other. It was soft and tasteless and incomprehensible. Like people's words, lots of movement, little meaning. But Sarah watched him, waiting for a reaction. Eris swallowed, nodded. Not because he liked it, because she had cooked it. And in the forest, if someone cooks for you, it means you're part of the pack. And the pack doesn't reject food. That's the law.
After breakfast, Sarah led him through the city. Eris walked beside her, soaking it all in. Everything was new. Stalls with fabrics. He touched the silk and pulled his hand away. Slippery, like a snake's skin, but dead. Why do people wear dead snakes? A fruit stall. He saw an apple, picked it up, took a bite. He grimaced. Sour, just like in birchwood. People eat this willingly? Surprising. Sarah paid for the apple with a coin. Eris watched the process. She gave a round thing.
The vendor gave an apple, an exchange, but an unequal one. An apple is food. A round thing is nothing. Why do people trade food for nothing? He asked Sarah. She tried to explain. Money is value. No, money is a promise of value. No, money is what everyone considers valuable because everyone else does too. Eris listened very carefully. Then he said it was the silliest thing he'd ever heard in his life. In the forest, if you want meat, you hunt. If you want a pelt, you skin it. If you want to cross someone else's territory, you leave a bone at the border. A bone is a thing. It smells. It's real. Little round things don't smell, so they're not real. So people are deceiving each other every day, willingly, on a massive scale, and no one is outraged. Sarah didn't know how to respond. They were walking past the square when Eris stopped. His nostrils flared. He turned his head, abruptly, like a beast. To the left of the square stood a house larger than the others. Stone, 2 stories. A flag with a coat of arms. A smell was coming from the house. Not of sickness, something else. The smell of blood. Someone else's blood on hands. Many hands. An old smell ingrained in the walls, and a fresh smell on the threshold. Sarah said it was a branch of the Hunters Guild. Eris didn't know what a guild was. Sarah explained. People who kill beasts for money. Eris stared at the building for a long time. Then he asked why. Sarah said that beasts attack people. Eris asked if people attack beasts. Sarah fell silent. Eris walked toward the building. It was noisy inside. A long hall with boards on the walls. On the boards were pieces of paper with writing. Contracts. Eris couldn't read them, but he could smell them. The papers smelled of ink and greed and fear. People in armor and leather sat at the tables. Hunters. They smelled of sweat and metal and the blood of beasts. Some smelled of their own blood. Wounds, fresh and old. Eris stood in the doorway. The conversations died down. The hunters looked at him. A wyvern pelt, a necklace of teeth, a scar, bare feet, eyes that didn't blink. One of the hunters stood up, a big one, with an axe on his back. He approached. He looked down at him. He asked who he was and what he wanted. Eris looked up at him. He was a head shorter, 30 kilos lighter, unarmed, and completely calm. So calm that the hunter took half a step back. Instinctively, without understanding why. His body understood faster than his brain. Standing before him was a predator he couldn't gauge. His body ordered him to step back. His brain didn't have time to object. Eris didn't answer the question. He walked over to the board with the contracts. He sniffed one piece of paper, then another. He stopped at the third. He couldn't read the text, but this piece of paper carried a scent. Distant, familiar, the scent of a specific beast. Every contract bore the traces of a scout who had seen the target, and the scout carried the scent of the target. Eris read the paper with his nose. A wyvern, young, female, wounded, left wing, hiding in the quarries to the west, scared and angry. He turned around, pointed at the slip of paper, then pointed west, then pointed at his left shoulder and winced, feigning pain. The hunters exchanged glances. The slip of paper did indeed describe a contract for a wyvern in the western quarries. C rank, a reward of 20 silver coins. A group of 3 hunters had set out for it yesterday and returned empty-handed. The wyvern was fast and vicious. Eris tapped the slip of paper with his finger. Then he tapped his chest. Then he pointed at the door. The meaning was clear. Me, there, now. A hunter with an axe, he asked. Is that a suicide mission?
Eris didn't understand the word, but he understood the scent. Mockery, contempt. In the forest, that scent meant one thing. The one who mocks considers himself superior. Eris didn't argue. Arguments are human. He turned and left. Sarah was waiting outside. She saw his face and didn't ask any questions. Eris headed west. Sarah followed him. He didn't ask. She didn't ask. The quarry was a 2-hour walk away, abandoned. The stone had been mined out 10 years ago. Only the quarries and tunnels remained. A good place for a wounded beast. Quiet, dark. The stone retains heat. Eris found the wyvern in 20 minutes, by scent. She was in a distant tunnel, curled up in a ball. A wing hung at an odd angle. Broken. Not wounded. Broken. The paper hunters couldn't finish it off because it was in a narrow space. Their armor got in the way. Swords are useless in tight quarters. The wyvern fought back and they retreated. Eris entered the tunnel, alone, without light. He didn't need light. 16 years in the forest caves. His eyes saw better in the dark than an owl's. The wyvern growled, a warning. Eris stopped, crouched, tilted his head to the side, slightly. That's what wolf cubs do when they ask an elder for permission to approach. The wyvern fell silent. He crawled forward, slowly, on all fours, not like a human, like a beast. The wyvern didn't move. He reached her, reached out a hand, touched her muzzle. The creature was trembling, from pain, from the cold, from fear. Eris examined the wing. Yes, a fracture, clean, 2 bones. Mom had shown him how to treat it. He'd done it for Uncle Viz when he fell off a cliff. Uncle Viz was an A-rank griffin and weighed a ton. His wings were 3 times bigger than this little one's. Eris took a small pouch from his belt. He pulled out a strip of dried bark, moistened it with his saliva, wrapped it around the fracture. The bark swelled, hardened. It became a splint. Then he took a piece of dried meat from his stash, the last one. He placed it in front of the wyvern's snout. She sniffed it, ate it. Eris stroked her head. He stood up and walked back. Sarah was waiting at the entrance to the quarry, pale. Her hands were clenched into fists.
She heard growling and silence. The silence was more frightening. Eris stepped into the light, unharmed, clean, not even dusty. Sarah exhaled. Eris told her that the wyvern was young and that its wing had been broken. It doesn't attack. It defends itself. It needs 3 weeks. Then she'll fly away on her own. The contract to kill her is pointless. It's like killing a kitten that hisses because someone stepped on its tail. Sarah looked at him. Then she asked quietly, "Is that how you treat all animals?" Eris didn't understand the question. How so? He treated them the only way he knew how, the way his mother taught him, the way they treat each other in the pack. They help the young ones. They heal the wounded. They remember the dead. It's simple. On the way back to the city, Eris spoke a long sentence for the first time in 2 days, slowly, with pauses, choosing each word carefully. He said he didn't understand why people killed animals they could chase away, and he didn't understand why they chased away those they could tame, and he didn't understand why they tamed those they could simply leave alone. Sarah walked beside him and said nothing. She was thinking about how her mother had died of the wither. Her mana had left her body overnight, the best herbalist for 100 kilometers, and she couldn't help at all. She thought about how this boy heals the beasts that everyone else tries to kill. And she thought that maybe the world is sick, not because mana is fading away, but because people have forgotten how to treat what surrounds them. A crowd was waiting for them in Linden. Hunters from the guild followed and discovered that the wyvern was alive, with a splint on its wing, and it wasn't attacking. The senior hunter stood at the guild gates, his face red. A contract worth 20 silver. The beast was supposed to be dead, but the boy the pelt had healed it instead. That was a violation. It undermined the system. If every vagabond started healing monsters instead of killing them, the guild would be out of work. The senior hunter approached Eris. He began to speak loudly. Eris listened. He didn't understand half the words, but he understood the scent. Anger, fear for his position, loneliness. That was the scent a beast in the forest gave off when guarding its prey.
even rotten prey, even useless prey.
Simply because it was used to, considering it its own.
Eris didn't listen. He looked the elder in the eyes, evenly, calmly, without defiance, without threat. He just looked, the way a leader looks at someone who barks for no reason. The elder fell silent mid-sentence. He looked away. He didn't understand why himself. His body obeyed before his mind did. Eris walked past. Sarah followed him. The crowd parted, silently. No one understood what had happened, but they all felt the same thing. The boy in the pelt was not a human, not a beast. Something else. Something not found in the guild's classifications, nor in the church's prayers, nor in the decrees of the empire. Something new, or very old. Eris lived with Sarah for 5 days. For 5 days he learned to be human. The results were modest. He mastered the spoon on the second day. He held it strangely, like a knife. But the food made it into his mouth, and that counted as progress. He rejected the fork entirely. 4 sharp prongs on a stick, a weapon, not a tool for eating. He tried to hurl it at the wall 3 times before Sarah hid all the forks in the house. He rejected the clothes, too. Sarah bought him a shirt, white, linen.
Eris put it on, stood there for a minute, took it off, said it prevented his skin from breathing, and that in battle the fabric would slow him down by 0.3 of a second. Sarah asked what kind of battle. Eris looked at her as if she'd asked why one should breathe. Any battle. A battle could start at any moment. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. In the forest, that's a given. Here, apparently not. People walk around in clothes and aren't afraid that the fabric will slow them down. That means they're sure the fight won't start. That certainty seemed like madness to Eris. On the 3rd day, he discovered a mirror. Sarah found him standing motionless in front of it. He had been standing there for 20 minutes. He was looking at his face, for the first time in his life. There are no mirrors in the forest. There is water, but in water the reflection is dark and wavering. Here it was clear. He saw his scar, white, from his temple to his chin. His mother left it when he was 2, not out of malice. She turned in her sleep and hit him with her tail. Fenrir's tail weighs as much as a house. Eris survived. The scar remained. He touched it with his finger and didn't understand why people reacted to it. A scar is just a scar, a sign that you've lived, that someone close to you was big enough to leave a mark. In the forest, scars are a source of pride. Here, for some reason, they're a source of fear. He saw his own eyes, a winter sky, light, almost transparent. Mom used to say he had the eyes of his real mother, the one, the human one, the one who gave birth to him and gave him away, didn't abandon him, gave him away. Mom knew the difference between those things. To abandon means not to want. To give away means to want, but not to be able to. Eris believed Mom. Mom doesn't lie, except when she's worried. On the 4th day, something important happened. Eris was sitting in the backyard, sharpening his knife, a knife made from Fenrir's fang. The only thing he'd taken from the forest besides the pelt, the necklace, and the pouch of scales. The knife didn't need sharpening, it never got dull, but the process of sharpening was soothing, a rhythmic motion, stone against bone. Shh, shh. A sound like his mother's breathing. Sarah sat nearby, sorting through dried herbs. They were silent, comfortably silent. In the forest, silence is a form of trust. If you are silent next to someone, it means you do not consider them a threat. It means you do not need to keep your ears open for them. You can simply be. Sarah shared that feeling. She didn't try to fill the silence. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer tea. She just sat there, sorting through the herbs. For the first time in 5 days in the human world, Eris felt something resembling peace. Then he sensed something else, a scent, familiar, from birchwood, disease, silent death, wilting. He stood up, turned toward the house. The scent was coming from the street, not from one place, from several, 3, no, 5, no, more. He went out into the street. He walked through the town, sniffing the air.
Sarah followed him. Eris stopped at houses, pointed, here and there. Sarah turned pale. She knew these houses, knew who lived in them. Old Henrik on Mill Street, the Thorn twins on Market Square, Widow Claire behind the church, little Pete from the Baker's family. They were all on their feet. They all looked healthy, but Eris shook his head. No, they reek of emptiness. The mana is fading, quietly, slowly. They don't know yet.
In a month, they'll find out. In 3, they'll fall. In 6.
Eris didn't finish. Sarah finished for him. In 6, they'll die, like her mother. Eris looked at her. He saw the scent, not tears, not fear, rage. The quiet, cold rage of a man who had already failed to help once and now watched it happen again. Eris reached out his hand, not to embrace, not to comfort. He knew how to do neither. He placed his hand on her shoulder, heavily, the way you place a hand when you say, "I'm here." In the language of beasts, this gesture meant, "You're not alone, and we'll hunt together." Sarah looked at his hand, then at him, then she nodded. The next day, Eris left the city before dawn. Sarah woke up and found the storeroom empty. A wyvern pelt lay on the floor, neatly rolled up. He had left the pelt. That meant he would return. In the forest, you don't leave a pelt behind if you're leaving for good. A pelt is a home. A home waits for its owner. Eris went into the forest, not the forest of devourers, an ordinary forest south of Linden, small, quiet, pitiful by his standards. The trees were thin, they were small, the mana in the soil barely glowed. But there were plants,
and he was looking for one in particular. The root of the silent tree. The only plant that stops the wilting. The problem is that the silent tree grows only in the devourer's forest, only in SSS rank zones, only where mana is as thick as blood. It isn't here. It can't be. Eris searched anyway, for 3 days. He scoured every corner of the forest, sniffed every tree, dug under every rock. On the 3rd day, he didn't find a root. He found a trace, faint, barely noticeable. The scent of a silent tree in the soil, ancient, centuries old. Once, long ago, one grew here. Then it died, when the mana became too thin. But the roots remained deep. Dead roots do not heal. But Eris knew something no alchemist on the continent knew. A dead root of a silent tree, combination with 3 other ingredients, provides a quarter of the effect of a living one. Not a cure, a delaying agent. It buys time, months, maybe a year, enough to find a living root. He dug up the dead roots, filled a sack, returned to Sarah at dawn on the 4th day, dirty, scraped, with a sack on his shoulder. He placed the roots on the table, silently. Sarah looked at the roots, then at him. She didn't know what they were. Eris sat down. He began to explain, slowly. It was hard. Every word was like a stone that had to be chiseled out of a rock. He told her about the silent tree, about how it cures wither, about how there are no living trees here, but a dead root can be used if mixed with the juice of a marsh lily and the ashes of a white mushroom and a drop of blood from someone who carries no mana themselves. He didn't name the last ingredient. He just took out his knife and cut his finger. The blood was dark, almost black. Not because it was diseased, because the heart of emptiness stained everything that flowed through it. His blood absorbed light just as his chest absorbed mana. Sarah stared at the black drop, then at his face. Eris placed the drop on the root. The root twitched, barely noticeably, as if, for a moment, it remembered that it had once been alive. That would be enough. Eris spent the rest of the day explaining the recipe to Sarah. She took notes. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from realization. She held in her hands a recipe that could save dozens of lives, maybe hundreds, maybe more. A recipe that isn't in any textbook because it was created by a boy raised by an ancient beast. In the evening, Sarah brewed the first batch. Eris stood nearby and corrected her. Stir more slowly, lower the heat. Don't breathe over the cauldron.
The silent tree doesn't like strangers' breath. It absorbs emotions. If you breathe over it with anxiety, it will absorb the anxiety and the medicine will turn into poison. You have to breathe calmly, or not breathe at all. Eris didn't breathe while Sarah stirred. He could hold his breath for 4 minutes. His mom taught him. It comes in handy underwater. The decoction turned out cloudy, gray. It smelled of earth and something bitter. Eris tasted it. He nodded. It'll do. Not perfect. A living root would have yielded a clear golden decoction. A dead one yielded a gray one. But it worked. They began distributing the decoction the next morning. Sarah led the way. She knew who to take it to. Eris walked beside her. In every house it was the same. Distrust, fear, confusion. Then the first sip. Then silence. Then a look. Something was changing. Not right away, not noticeably, but it was changing. The wasting away slowed down. Little Pete stopped coughing at night. Old Hendrik stood up without his cane for the first time in a month. Widow Claire said that for the first time she didn't feel the cold in her bones. By the end of the day, there was a line at Sarah's door. Not of the sick, of those who had heard there was a cure. Rumors in a small town travel faster than the wind. By evening, Eris was sitting on the porch, licking salt. Sarah sat beside him. She was looking at her hands, the very hands that had failed to save her mother. Today, those hands had saved 7 people. Perhaps. So far, they'd only slowed it down, but slowing it down meant buying time, and time meant hope. Eris said nothing. He took a bundle of dried herbs out of his pocket. He placed it on her lap, quietly. She looked at it. These were the very herbs she had run out of 3 days ago. She hadn't told him about it. He remembered by the smell. Her workshop smelled of these herbs, and he noticed when the scent disappeared. Sarah clutched the herbs in her hands. She sat like that. Then she said thank you. Eris nodded. For him, it wasn't anything special. He'd noticed she'd run out. He'd brought some. That's what they do in the pack. Simple. On the 7th day of Eris's life in the human world, hunters arrived in Linden. Not locals. Imperial. A group of 4. 2 men, 2 women, all in identical gray cloaks bearing the guild's emblem. Rank B. Serious. Eris sensed them 2 hours before they arrived. Metal, leather, magic, and something else. Intention. In the forest, intention smells distinct from everything else, like a note you can hear through the noise. These 4 were walking with intention. Not to kill, to assess. The difference is subtle, but obvious to Eris. A killer smells different. A killer's scent is compressed, dense, like a stone before it falls. These ones had an open scent, broad. They were going to gather information. Sarah found out about the hunters when they entered the city. She turned pale. The Imperial Guild doesn't come to Linden without a reason. Linden is a small town. There are no contracts higher than C rank. A B rank quartet is like a cannon to a sparrow. If they're here, it means they're not here for a contract. They're here for him. Eris wasn't hiding. He was sitting on the porch of Sarah's house, carving a spoon. A small one, a wooden one, for the girl from Birchwood. He didn't know why. He just thought she should have her own spoon. A small one, just right for her hand. He'd been carving for 3 days. The first 2 spoons were crooked. Wood didn't obey him the way bone did. He knew how to carve bone. Wood was soft and unpredictable, like people. The hunters found him quickly. Everyone in town knew where the savage lived. The leader of the group was a man in his 40s, short hair, a scar on his arm. He reeked of discipline and old pain. A warrior, a real one, not some braggart from the local guild. This one had seen death and grown accustomed to it. The leader approached. He introduced himself. Veron Court, guild appraiser, Imperial rank B. He had arrived at the capital's request to assess an unclassified subject. Eris looked up from his spoon. He looked at him. Veron did not look away. It was respectful. Eris nodded. Veron sat down across from him. The other 3 remained standing. They were tense, hands on their weapons. Not aggression, readiness. In the forest, this was the posture taken by beasts that didn't know what lay before them and were prepared for anything. Varan began to ask questions, calmly, without pressure. Name, where he came from, why.
How he healed the child, how he drove away the manticore.
Eris answered, briefly, not because he was hiding anything, because he didn't know the long answers. Name, Eris Grimm. Where from? The forest. Why? His mother sent him. He healed the child with roots. He asked the manticore to leave. Varen listened. His expression didn't change, but the scent changed. With every answer, the scent grew more and more sour. It was the scent of confusion. Varen didn't understand what was before him. He had been trained to assess threats, mages, warriors, monsters. Everyone has parameters: mana level, physical strength, speed, skills. Eris had none of these. Mana, 0. Physically, he looked like an ordinary teenager, not big, not muscular. Speed, unknown. Skills, spoon carving. But there was something about him that Varen couldn't describe with any term from the manual. Pressure. Not magical, not physical, just pressure. As if the air around the boy were denser, as if space respected him and contracted to make more room for him. Varen asked the final question. What's your rank? Eris didn't understand. Varen explained. The guild classifies everyone from F to SSS. F is the weakest.
SSS is the strongest.
What's his rank? Eris thought. For a long time. Then he answered. He said, there are no ranks in the forest. In the forest, there are those who are listened to and those who listen. Everyone listens to Mom. Everyone listens to him except Mom. Varan processed this information. His face twitched for the first time. Mom is Fenrir Grimwald, SSS rank. A creature the guild considers the #1 threat on the continent. A contract for his destruction has been hanging for 1,000 years. The bounty on Fenrir's head is an entire principality, and the boy standing before him had just said that everyone in the forest listened to him except for that creature. Varan stood up. He thanked him. He said he would write a report. Eris nodded and went back to his spoon. He wasn't interested in reports. He was interested in the spoon. It was still crooked. Varan walked back to his group. One of the women asked quietly what the assessment result was. Varan was silent for a long time. Then he said 3 words. Unclassified. Danger undetermined. The group left Linden 2 hours later. The next morning, in the capital of the Empire, a report landed on the desk of the head of the guild's analytical department. A young man, 16 years old, emerged from the Devourer's forest. Mana, 0. Rank, undetermined. Claims to have been raised by SSS rank Fenrir Grimwald. Indirectly confirmed. Carries SSS class materials as if they were everyday items. Driven away a B rank manticore without using force. Cures wither using unknown methods. Recommendation, highest priority surveillance. The department head read the report, reread it, took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on. He read it again. Then he summoned his secretary and dictated 2 orders. First, send a permanent observer to Linden. Second, notify His Majesty's Court of a potential Class 0 anomaly. Class 0. That code hadn't been used in 200 years. The last time it was used was when the Leviathan rose from the ocean and destroyed 3 coastal cities in a single night. Class 0 meant one thing. We don't know what it is, and we don't know what to do about it. Meanwhile, Eris finished the spoon. 3rd attempt. It was crooked, but less so than the previous ones. He turned it over in his hands, sniffed it. It smelled of wood and his palms. Not bad. He wrapped the spoon in a leaf and put it in a pouch. He'd give it to the girl later, when he passed by Birchwood, if he did. The human world turned out to be bigger than he'd thought, and more complicated, and louder, and more confusing. But sometimes it was quiet in there, like now. He sat on the porch. Sarah was inside brewing a potion for the sick. She was humming softly. Eris didn't know this song, but the melody was like the way his mother hummed at night, low, muffled. soothing. He closed his eyes. He inhaled the scent of mint and salt and wood and Sarah. A scent that was starting to feel familiar. Not like home, but like the beginning of home. An expression appeared on his face that Sarah had never seen before. Gentle, quiet, almost human. He didn't know that this was called peace. He simply felt that at that moment, nothing was trying to kill him, and someone nearby was humming, and the little bag of salt on his belt was full. And that was enough. On the horizon beyond the city walls, toward the capital, a courier was galloping with a zero-class report. In 3 days, the court would learn of Eris Grime.
In a week, the church would learn of Eris Grime. In 2 weeks, every power on the continent would know of him. The boy from the forest, a talentless fool with an empty core, Fenrir's son, the wild healer, a riddle everyone wanted to solve, some to use him, others to destroy him, still others to understand him. And he sat on the wing and carves a spoon for a girl he's seen only once in his life, because she didn't have one of her own. And in his pack, everyone must have their own spoon. That's the law now. He made it up himself. The first human law in his life. Class Zero's report reached the capital in 3 days. It lay on His Majesty's advisor's desk for 2 more days because the advisor couldn't believe his eyes. Then the advisor showed it to the king. The king didn't believe it either. Then they showed it to the empire's chief alchemist. The alchemist turned pale. Then he blushed. Then he asked for paper and began writing a request for an expedition. Mana 0, cures desiccation, raised by Fenrir, wears SSS class materials. For an alchemist, it was like reading that someone had found a living god who was carving spoons in a provincial town. While the capital digested the news, Eris lived his little life. In the morning, he woke up on the floor of Sarah's storeroom. Tomorrow, he ate porridge with a crooked spoon. Then he walked through the city. He sniffed, he listened, he learned. He learned 20 new words in a week. Among them were market and thank you and no thank you and please don't shout, I can hear you anyway. He used that last phrase often. People in Linden shouted a lot. Merchants shouted about their wares. Children shouted with joy. Wives shouted at their husbands. Husbands shouted into the void. For Eris, it was unbearable. In the forest, a shout means one thing: danger, deadly. If you shout, you're calling the pack for help. You don't scream for no reason. Here, people screamed constantly, and no one came to help, so screaming means nothing. So people use their voices just to make noise, like birds that sing not because they're happy, but because they're afraid of the silence. Eris wasn't afraid of the silence. He was afraid of the noise. On the 10th day, a caravan arrived from the capital of the Duchy of Cardwin. A large one, 12 wagons, guards, flags. Eris stood in the square and watched. The caravan carried fabrics and spices and something else, something that smelled different, not goods. A person, a specific person in a closed carriage in the middle of the caravan. The scent came from there, young, female. It smelled of ink and paper and metal and fear. Not ordinary fear. An old fear, familiar, like clothes worn for so long that you stop noticing them. The carriage stopped at City Hall. The door opened. A girl stepped out. 17 years old, dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, an expensive but not flashy dress, gray with silver. Around her neck was a thin chain with a coat of arms. Her eyes were hazel and sharp. She surveyed the square the way Eris would survey an unfamiliar clearing. Quickly, intently, noting the exits and the dangers and the number of people and the distance to the nearest cover. Eris recognized that look. That's how predators look when they've strayed into foreign territory. Her name was Ivy Cardwin Ashton, heiress to the duchy. She hadn't come to Linden for fabrics. She'd come for him. The Duchy of Cardwin bordered the Devourer's forest. For the past 3 years, the duchy's lands had been drying up faster than the rest. Harvests were failing. Mana was draining from the soil.
Children were being born with dim cores. The Cardwan-Ashton line was on the brink. Not financially, magically. An heiress without a strong core is no heiress, and Ivy's core was weak, dull, like a dying candle. Her father, Duke Cardwan, knew this. All her life, he had been preparing his daughter for a political marriage, an infusion of blood from a strong house, the only way to preserve the title. Ivy hated this plan, every detail of it, but she had no alternative. Until she heard about the boy from the forest who cures the wither. She came on her own, without her father's permission. She took a caravan under the pretext of a trade inspection. Her father would find out in a week. By then, she planned to have already obtained what she came for, a cure, an ally, or at least information. Ivy found Eris an hour later, not because she was looking for him, because he was standing in the middle of the square eating a raw carrot he'd snatched from the caravan's cart. He didn't steal it. He didn't understand the concept of theft. The carrot was lying there. He was hungry. He took it.
In the forest, food belongs to whoever finds it first. Here, the rules were different. A caravan guard grabbed his arm. Eris looked at the guard. The guard let go. His fingers unclenched on their own. Like in a dream when you try to hold on to something but your hand won't obey. The guard took 3 steps back. He turned pale. He didn't understand why. Ivy saw it, everything, from start to finish. She saw how the 4th-rank guard lost control of his own body simply from the gaze of a barefoot teenager holding a carrot. She approached. Eris looked at her, sniffed the air. Ink, paper, metal, fear as old as clothes. And something else, beneath the fear, deep down, almost invisible. Stubbornness. The vicious, desperate stubbornness of one who refuses to give up even though everyone around him has already given in. Eris knew that scent. That's how the little fox cub Tyr smelled when a pack of jackals cornered him. Tyr was 3 times smaller than any of them, but he growled. He bared his teeth. He didn't back down, because behind him was the den with his brothers. Eris had driven the jackals away then. Tyr had slept at his feet for 3 nights in a row afterward, not out of gratitude, out of exhaustion. When you stop being strong, you fall asleep next to the one you trust. Ivy introduced herself, by her full name, with her title, with her coat of arms. She was used to that a title made an impression. Eris listened. The words were long and incomprehensible. Duchy, Eris, Cardwan-Ashton. He didn't understand a thing. To him, she was a girl who smelled of stubbornness and was afraid but didn't show it. Ivy quickly realized that titles were useless. She got down to business. She said she knew about his ability to cure the wither. She said her lands were dying. She said she needed his help. Eris chewed on a carrot and listened. Then he asked one thing. "Where does it hurt?" Ivy froze. She had been preparing a speech, arguments, proposals for an exchange of services, political leverage. She had a 12-point plan. Eris asked where it hurt, just as a doctor asks a patient, simply and directly. Ivy hadn't expected simplicity. She'd forgotten how to speak simply. Since she was 10, every word had been a chess move. Every phrase hid 3 meanings. And here he was, standing barefoot with a carrot, asking where it hurt. She answered, "Everywhere." Ivy stopped short. She hadn't intended to tell the truth. The truth wasn't part of the plan. But the words just slipped out. Everywhere. The earth hurts. People hurt. She hurts. Her people hurt. Everything hurts. And it's been hurting for a long time. And it hurts badly. And she's tired of pretending she's coping. Eris nodded, finished the carrot, said he'd take a look. Ivy didn't understand. Look at what? Look where? Eris was already walking, toward her carriage. Ivy followed him. The guards tensed. Eris approached the carriage. He placed his palm on the wooden side. He closed his eyes. He stood there for a minute. The carriage was made of cardvan wood. He could sense it. The wood remembers the land where it grew. That land smelled of dryness, dust, dying,
like the forest on bad days when Mom is sick and everything around falls silent. Eris opened his eyes. He looked at Ivy, seriously, heavily. He said that her land wasn't just drying up, it was being drained. Someone was drawing mana from the soil, actively, purposefully. This wasn't a disease, it was theft. Ivy turned pale. She had suspected it for a long time, but suspicion and confirmation are two different things. Suspicion can be ignored.
Confirmation cannot. She asked who. Eris shrugged. He didn't know, but he could go there and sniff it out. The earth will tell. The earth always tells if you know how to listen. Ivy proposed a deal. He goes to Cardwin, inspects the lands, helps however he can. In return, she gives him access to the duchy's best blacksmiths and protection, political protection. An official visit under the Cardwen coat of arms. That meant the guild wouldn't be able to touch him without the Duke's permission. Eris didn't understand half of it, but he caught the gist. Blacksmiths, good ones, who make patterned iron. He agreed. She found out that evening. She sat at the table and was silent. For a long time. Eris stood in the doorway and waited. He didn't understand why she was silent. Usually the silence between them was good. This silence was different, heavy, like a stone in the stomach. Sarah asked if he was leaving. Eris nodded. Sarah asked for how long. Eris didn't know. He didn't understand human distances or human time. To him, a month and a day were barely distinguishable. In the forest, time was measured differently, by seasons, by the moons, by his mother's growls in the mornings.
Sarah stood up. She walked over to the shelf. She took out her herb book, a thick notebook with a leather cover. She handed it to Eris. He took it. He sniffed it. It smelled like her, like mint and ink and patience. Sarah said that all the recipes he had told her were in there, and all the ones she knew herself. If he encountered Patience and she wasn't around, he should find someone who could read and show them the notebook. Eris clutched the notebook, tightly, the way you hold something important. He didn't know how to say what he was feeling. He didn't know the words for it. But he knew smells, and Sarah smelled right now like a beast that gives part of its prey to another, not out of abundance, out of care. He put the notebook in the pouch, next to the salt and the scales and the crooked spoon for the girl. Then he took something else out of the pouch, a small bundle. He unwrapped it. Inside lay a bunch of dried herbs, not ordinary ones. Herbs aren't in any reference book. Silence herb. It grows only in the forest of devourers. Mom used to give it to him to chew when he was sick. It takes away any pain, even the kind that isn't in the body.
Eris placed the bundle on the table. He said one word. Mom. Then he thought. He added, for you. Mom, for you. He meant that it was from Mom, that Mom had sent it, that when he left the forest, Mom gave him this herb and said, give it to whoever is to you as I am. Moms knew. Moms always know. Even if Mom weighs as much as a mountain and has fangs as long as a tree. Sarah took the bundle. She looked at the herb. She looked at Eris. Her eyes were wet. Eris didn't understand why people cry when they're happy. In the forest, they don't cry when they're happy. In the forest, they howl when they're happy. Quietly, long and low, on a single note. He almost howled. He held back. People don't howl. People cry. Strange creatures. In the morning, Eris left with Ivy's caravan, standing on the wagon. He refused to sit in the carriage. It smells like strangers. He stood and looked ahead, the wind in his face, the smells of the road, dust, grass, horse sweat, and far ahead, the smell of Cardwin, dry, heavy, sick. Eris squeezed the little bag of salt. New territory, new smells, a new task. Mom said to become human. He wasn't there yet, but he'd learned to eat with a spoon, not throw forks and say thank you. Not bad for 2 weeks. A wyvern hide lay nearby on the cart. He'd taken it from Sarah's storeroom. The hide smelled of mint. It hadn't smelled that way before. Now it did. Sarah's scent had seeped into the hide over 10 days.
Eris held the hide to his face. He inhaled. Mint and home. 2 scents that now meant one thing. The journey to Cardwin took 6 days. Eris spent 6 days on the cart learning to talk with Ivy. It was harder than talking with Sarah. Sarah spoke simply, in short phrases, and she was silent when there was nothing to say. Ivy was never silent. She spoke constantly, fast, sharp, every word sharpened like a dagger. Eris didn't understand half of it, but he listened, the way you listen to a stream in the forest. Not for the meaning, for the rhythm. Ivy talked about the duchy, about her father who was sick and wouldn't admit it, about her mother who died when she was 5, about her brothers who didn't survive. 3. All 3 were born with empty cores and didn't make it past their first year. Ivy is the only one, the last one, with a dim core that glows like a stub.
In a world where mana is everything, she was almost nothing. Almost. Because mana doesn't require a mind, and Ivy had enough mind for 3. Eris listened to her story and sniffed the air. With every word, Ivy's scent changed. When she spoke of her father, it smelled of bitterness. When she spoke of her brothers, it smelled of salt and old tears. When she spoke of herself, it smelled of iron, cold, hard. She had forged herself from what remained, from stubbornness and anger and a refusal to die quietly. Eris respected that. In the forest, those are the ones who survive. On the 3rd day of the journey, Ivy saw Eris eat for the first time. The caravan stopped for lunch. The cook laid out bread, cheese, and meat on the table. Eris looked at the table. He took a piece of raw meat from the supplies, not from a plate, from the bag of provisions. Raw, red, cold. He sat down on the ground and began to eat, with his hands, with his teeth, without any expression on his face, like a wolf eats, methodically and quickly. Ivy stood and watched. 12 years at court had taught her not to show emotion, but here she forgot. Her face went blank. Her jaw dropped. She asked him what he was doing. Eris raised his head, meat in his hands, blood on his chin. He said one word. Eating. Ivy closed her mouth, opened it, closed it again. Then she said that people prepare meat before eating it. They fry it, boil it, salt it. Eris thought, why? Meat is meat. Fire ruins the taste. Ivy sat down across from him, right on the ground. A dress worth 200 silver pieces in the dust. She said that if he was going to live among people, he needed to eat like a human. Eris looked at her, looked at the meat, looked back, said he'd try it. That evening, he ate roasted meat for the first time. He chewed for a long time. It was dry and tough and had lost half its flavor. But Ivy was watching, and he swallowed, because she asked. And when someone from the pack asks, you listen, even if the request is silly. On the 4th day, something happened that no one expected. The caravan was passing through a narrow gorge, cliffs on both sides. The road wound between the rocks. Eris was standing on the wagon and suddenly froze. His nostrils flared. His eyes widened. He jumped off the cart, silently, quickly, like a cat leaping from a fence, without a sound. Ivy shouted at him to ask what was wrong. Eris didn't answer. He ran ahead of the caravan. The guards didn't have time to react. He moved faster than they expected. Much faster. The man in the wyvern hide ran barefoot over the rocks so fast that the horses couldn't catch up to him. He stopped 100 meters ahead of the caravan. He stood in the middle of the road and raised his hand. Halt. The caravan stopped. Eris stood and looked up, at the cliff to the right. There were people there, 12 of them. Crossbows, swords, light leather armor. Bandits. An ambush. They were waiting for the caravan to go deeper into the gorge. Then they would block the exit and rob them in the tight space where the guards couldn't turn around. Standard tactics, effective. Many caravans had been lost in this gorge. Eris saw them through the eyes of a beast, not as people, as predators hunting in a pack. A poorly organized pack, without a leader, no hierarchy. 12 loners who decided that together they were stronger.
They were wrong. He walked toward the cliff. One of the bandits shouted a warning from above. Eris didn't stop. He began to climb, without a rope, without a safety line. His fingers found cracks in the rock, as if the rock itself were telling him where to grip. 12 years of rock climbing in the forest, on cliffs covered in moss and ice and the slime of creatures. These cliffs were dry and warm, a playground. He climbed up in 30 seconds. He stood at the edge. 12 men with weapons were looking at him. Eris looked at them. They stood in a semicircle, crossbows aimed, swords at the ready. Eris tilted his head, slightly, like wolves do, and exhaled. Not a growl, not a scream. An exhalation, slow, deep, with something at the bottom, something that wasn't a sound, something that came not from his throat, but from his chest, from where other people have mana. In Eris, there is emptiness, and emptiness knows how to crush. The nearest thug dropped his crossbow. His hands stopped obeying him. The second stepped back. The third sat down on the ground. His legs buckled. The rest stood but trembled, slightly, violently, one after another. Weapons clattered in their shaking hands. Eris didn't move. He just stood and watched. 30 seconds. A minute. The bandit leader, a large man with a scar on his throat, did what none of his men expected. He dropped his sword, raised his hands, and said they were leaving, right now, without loot, without discussion, just leaving. Eris nodded. The bandits left, quickly, without looking back. 3 minutes later, the gorge was clear. Eris climbed back down. He walked over to the caravan. Ivy was standing by the carriage, white as a sheet. The guards stood with their swords at the ready. Everyone was looking at Eris. He walked past them, jumped onto the wagon. He sat down. He pulled a carrot from his supplies, took a bite, looked at Ivy, said they could go. Ivy opened her mouth, closed it, then asked in a quiet voice what that was. Eris shrugged. He said they reeked of intent, and he showed them it wasn't worth it. Ivy asked how. Eris thought, chose a word. He said he had asked. 12 armed bandits had left because a barefoot teenager had asked them to. Ivy got into the carriage. She closed the door and sat there for 2 hours in complete silence. She was going over everything she knew about the world, and the world didn't add up. On the 6th day, they arrived in Cardwin. The city was 20 times larger than Linden. Stone walls, 3 tiers, a castle on a hill, flags bearing the family crest. Eris stood on the cart and watched. The city smelled of sickness. The very ground beneath him smelled of sickness. The withering here was stronger, much stronger. The mana in the air wasn't liquid like in Linden. It was almost absent, like water in the desert. A drop here, a drop there, emptiness between the drops. Eris placed his palm on his chest, where the heart of emptiness lay. It responded, quietly, dully, like a tuning fork. The emptiness in his chest sensed the emptiness in the earth and responded. Eris clenched his fist. It was unpleasant, as if someone were pulling at your ribs from the inside. Ivy noticed. She asked what was wrong with him. Eris lowered his hand. He said the city was hungry. Ivy didn't understand. Eris pointed at the ground. The city is hungry. The earth is hungry. Everything is hungry. Someone took the food. Ivy understood. This time she understood right away. They rode through the gates. Cardwin Castle had stood on the hill for 300 years. The stone walls were gray and sturdy and smelled of time. Eris stood in the main hall and looked up. The ceiling was lost in the darkness. Columns as thick as a tree. Tapestries on the walls. Portraits of men and women with identical sharp chins. The Cardwin Ashton family, generation after generation. All of them were looking down, at Eris. He looked at them. They smelled of dust, dead, long ago. Duke Cardwin sat in an armchair by the fireplace, a large man, once strong, now thin, gray skin, sunken eyes. He smelled just like the earth surrounding the city, dryness, emptiness, fading mana. The Duke was drying up too. Eris understood this from his first breath. Ivy introduced Eris to her father. The Duke looked at the boy in the fur and said nothing. His advisors stood behind him and whispered, "Savage, vagabond, charlatan." Eris heard their whispers and smelled their scent. Greed, contempt, and fear. Always fear. The Duke asked what the boy could do for his lands. Eris looked at him, then at Ivy, then back at the Duke. He said that, for starters, he needed to go outside the walls and touch the earth. The Duke raised an eyebrow. Touch the earth. Eris nodded. The advisors whispered louder. The Duke raised his hand. Silence. He said, "Let him touch it." Eris left the castle. He walked down the hill. He reached the field beyond the wall.
The field was empty. Yellow, dry grass. Not a single ear of grain, not a single sprout. The earth was cracked, like an old man's face. Eris knelt down. He placed his palms in the ground. He closed his eyes and listened, just as his mother had taught him. Not with his ears, with his whole body, with his skin, with his bones, with the emptiness in his chest. The earth spoke, quietly, faintly, like a dying beast. It said it was in pain, that something was being pulled from it, for a long time, deeply, through something that runs beneath the earth, far away, to the south. Eris listened for 10 minutes. Then he stood up, hands in the ground, face motionless. He turned toward the south. 200 kilometers away stood the city of Valaris, the capital of the Holy Empire, the heart of the Church of the Bright Mother. And at the center of that heart sat a man who for 3 centuries had been drinking mana from the earth like a tick drinks blood from a dog. Eris didn't know that yet. He knew the direction, south, and he knew the smell. Old, greedy, human. He returned to the castle. He told Ivy and the Duke that someone in the south was drawing mana from the earth through underground channels. The channels were old, hundreds of years old. They were like the roots of a dead tree that prevented the living from growing. They needed to be cut. The Duke asked how. Eris said he knew of one way. We need the blood of someone who has no mana, his blood. If we pour it into the spot where the channel is closest to the surface, the heart of the void in the blood will block the channel, temporarily for a few months. But that will be enough for the earth to begin to recover. The Duke was silent. The advisors were silent. Ivy was silent. Eris didn't understand why everyone was silent. He proposed a solution. Simple, practical. In the forest, when you propose a solution, the pack nods and goes to do it. Here, everyone stands and is silent. The Duke finally asked, how much blood? Eris thought. He estimated by the smell. The channel is deep, wide. A lot is needed. He said about a cup, every day, for a week. The Duke turned pale. A cup of blood a day is dangerous for a human. Eris shrugged. He'd lost more when Uncle Crow accidentally stepped on him in the dark. For him, a cup of blood was a scratch. His body healed quickly, not magically, biologically. 16 years among SSS rank creatures. His body had adapted or died. It had adapted. The next morning, Eris stood in a field beyond the wall. In his hand, a knife made from Fenrir's fang. A cup lay nearby. He had found the spot where the channel ran closest to the surface. The ground was colder here. No grass grew at all. A circle of dead soil 3 paces in diameter. Eris cut his palm. Dark blood flowed into the bowl. He poured the blood into the crack in the ground. The earth absorbed it, greedily, quickly, like a parched throat drinking water. The heart of the void in the blood was doing its work. It met the mana flowing through the channel and absorbed it. Not forever, but the channel was narrowing. The flow was weakening, as if a rag had been stuffed into a pipe. Water still flows, but it is no longer a river, a trickle. Eris did this every morning, 7 days, a cup of blood every day. On the 4th day, his head was spinning. On the 5th, he collapsed after the procedure. He got up. He walked back. He didn't tell anyone. On the 6th day, Ivy found him sitting against the castle wall, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. She crouched down beside him, looked at his hand, roughly bandaged, with cloth made from his own hide, blood seeping through. She asked why he hadn't said he felt sick. Eris didn't understand the question. Bad is when you're dying. He wasn't dying, he was just dizzy. That wasn't bad. It was uncomfortable. There's a difference. Ivy clenched her fists, her nails dug into her palms. She said he was an idiot. Eris agreed. Mom used to say that too, often, with tenderness. Ivy wasn't tender. She was angry. Angry because this boy was giving his blood to save her land, hers, not his own. He didn't care about the Duchy of Cardwin. He didn't care about titles or politics. He simply saw that the land was sick and set about healing it, just as he'd healed the girl in Birchwood, just as he'd healed the wyvern in the quarry. Simply because if it hurts, it needs to be healed, that's all. No conditions, no bargaining, no calculation. Ivy hated him for it. Because she couldn't do that. She calculated, she weighed things, she bargained. Every action had a price, and every price was up for negotiation. But he simply cut his arm and poured blood onto the land because the land was sick. On the 7th day, Eris poured the last cup. He stood up, staggered, steadied himself, placed his palm on the ground, and smiled. For the first time in a week. The earth was warmer, just a little, barely noticeable, but warmer. The channel had narrowed to a thread. The mana had stopped leaking. The earth began to store it. Slowly, drop by drop. But it had begun. Eris turned toward the castle. People stood on the wall. The Duke, Ivy, the advisors, the guards. They were looking down. Eris raised his hand. He waved. Awkwardly, clumsily, like a child who hadn't yet learned the gesture but had already seen it done. Ivy stood on the wall and looked at the barefoot boy in a fur coat with a bandaged arm and a crooked smile. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. Not a single word from her arsenal. No barbs, no sarcasm, no diplomatic turn of phrase. She just stood and watched. And something in her chest, where a dim core barely glowed, did something it had never done before. It ached. Not from emptiness, from fullness. After the blood ritual, Eris slept for 2 days. He didn't wake, not moving, like a corpse. Ivy checked his breathing every 3 hours. She didn't sleep. She sat nearby and watched. And she was angry at herself for sitting there and watching. On the 3rd morning, he opened his eyes, sat up, sniffed the air, looked at Ivy. She was sitting in a chair across from him, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair had come loose from its bun. Her dress was wrinkled. Eris said she smelled of exhaustion. Ivy said he smelled of blood and sweat, and that he needed to wash up. Eris didn't know what washing up meant. In the forest, he bathed in the river. He'd just step into the water and stand there. The water washed the dirt by itself. Ivy summoned the servants. They led him to the bathhouse, a stone room, hot water in a stone tub, steam. Eris stood and looked at the water. He touched it. Hot, pleasant. He pulled off his skin. He climbed into the tub, sat down, and froze. The water embraced him like his mother used to embrace him with her tail on winter nights. Warmth, peace, safety. He sat in the bath for an hour. The servants waited outside the door. An hour later, he came out, clean, wet, back in his pelt. The servants offered him clothes. Eris looked at the shirt and pants. He sniffed them. They didn't belong to him. He shook his head. His pelt. Only his pelt. Ivy was waiting for him in the dining hall. There was food on the table, lots of food. Meat, roasted, bread, fruit, cheese, wine. Eris sat down at the table. He picked up a spoon, not a fork, a spoon. He started eating the meat with a spoon. It was awkward, but he'd given his word to Seer that he'd use a spoon, and a word in the forest is law. Ivy watched. Then she couldn't take it anymore. She said there was a knife and fork for meat. Eris replied that a fork was a weapon, not a tool. Ivy rolled her eyes.
This was the first of many times she would roll her eyes because of him. Then she started talking about Cardvin, about politics, about how the duchy was in danger not only because of the wasting. 3 neighboring clans were laying claim to the lands. They knew that Ivy's core was weak. They know the Duke is ill. They're waiting for their moment, like vultures circling a wounded beast. Eris listened. He chewed the meat with a spoon. Then he asked one thing. Which house is the most brazen?
Ivy was surprised. Then she answered. The House of Auburn. Their heir is arriving in 3 days for a formal visit. In reality, he is coming to assess Cardvin's weakness and to propose a marriage to Ivy as a favor. Ivy uttered the word favor so that the air around them grew colder. Eris finished his meat, licked the spoon, set it on the table. Said that when the heir arrived, he would sniff him. Ivy asked why. Eris said that the scent would tell everything, what he wants, what he fears, what he hides. People can lie with words. Smell doesn't lie. Eris spent 3 days in Cardvin's workshops. Ivy kept her word. The duchy's best blacksmiths were at his service. Master Bren, old, strong, hands like anvils. He'd worked with metal for 50 years and thought he'd seen it all. Then Eris placed a Leviathan scale before him. Bren stared at the scale for 10 minutes without moving. Then he stood up, took off his apron, hung it on a hook, took it off again, put it on, took it off. His hands were shaking. He asked where it came from. Eris said it was from his mother's floor. Bren sat down. Eris explained, slowly, that he needed a knife made of this material. One knife. For one hand. His hand. The knife had to be light and thin and cut through everything, absolutely everything. Bren said he couldn't work with this on his own. He needed heat that wasn't in his forge. Leviathan scales melt at a temperature twice that of ordinary steel. Eris thought for a moment. Then he took something else out of the pouch. A small stone. Red. Warm. Firestone. In the forest, they lay underfoot like pebbles. A creature named Ashbreather exhaled them when it sneezed. Eris collected them from the floor of his mother's cave. A single stone like this could maintain the temperature of a smelting furnace for a month without fuel. Master Bren looked at the stone, then at the scales, then at Eris. Then he said he needed to sit down. He was already sitting. He meant he needed to sit down even more. They started work the next day. Eris stood nearby and explained how to work the scales. Bren listened. The old master, who had been teaching apprentices for 40 years, listened to the 16-year-old in a leather jacket and wrote down every word. Because the boy knew. He knew how the fibers lay in the scales, where to strike, where not to strike, at what angle to bend, which hammer to use at which stage. He knew this as a mother knows her child's face, without thought, without effort. He just knew. On the second day, Ivy came to the smithy. She had never been here before. The heat, the clanging, the sweat, all of that was beneath her station. She came in and saw Eris. He was standing at the anvil, naked from the waist up. The hide hung on a hook. It was the first time she had seen his body. Thin, veiny, covered in scars. Dozens of scars, hundreds. Each one told a story. A long one across his entire back, round ones on his shoulders, parallel ones on his ribs, claw marks, bite marks, marks from something that was neither claws nor teeth. He looked like a map of survival. 16 years among creatures that could have killed him with a single careless movement. And he had survived. Every scar said he had survived. Ivy stood in the doorway and looked at his back and counted the scars. Lost count after 40, just as Eris lost count counting houses. After 40, there were many. He had many scars. And he wasn't ashamed of a single one. Eris turned around, saw her, nodded, went back to work. To him, her presence was natural. A member of the pack had come to watch. That was normal. Ivy approached, stood beside him, silently. She watched as Bren struck the scales with a hammer, as the scales slowly gave way.
how the outline of the blade emerged from the shapeless lump. Eris corrected every blow, a little to the left, harder, quieter. Stop, turn it, strike again. Like a conductor, Bren was the orchestra, the anvil was the stage, and from beneath the hammer, something was being born that the world had never seen before. A knife forged from the scales of Leviathan, based on a design that existed only in the mind of the boy from the forest. Ivy stood nearby for 3 hours. She didn't say a word. Then she left. She stopped in the hallway, leaned against the wall, placed a hand on her chest. The dull core inside was warm. Warm for the first time in years. Not from mana, from something else. She didn't know what. She was angry that she didn't know. On the 3rd day of blacksmithing work in Cardwin, the heir to the Auburn family arrived. His name was Derek Auburn, 22 years old, handsome, well-groomed, A-rank mana, a strong core, a strong family. He arrived with an escort of 10 horsemen, all in silver armor, all with contempt on their faces. Eris was standing in the castle courtyard, cleaning scale from scale, when the escort rode through the gates. He looked up, sniffed, and frowned. Derek Auburn smelled unpleasant, not like a bad person, like an empty one. Lots of perfume, lot of metal, a lot of mana, and underneath it all, nothing. Empty, like a beautiful vessel without a bottom. Derek dismounted. He saw Eris. He smiled, indulgently. He asked the nearest guard who this ragged fellow was. The guard hesitated. Eris did not hesitate. He approached Derek, closely, very close. Closer than is customary among people. In the forest, the distance between beasts signifies status. The closer you are, the higher you're standing. Only an equal or a superior can come that close. Eris came that close. Derek stepped back, instinctively, and immediately grew angry at himself for retreating. Eris looked him in the eyes, tilted his head, sniffed his neck. Derek pushed him away. His hands were shaking, not from anger, something else. Something ancient stirred within him at contact with Eris. Something his body remembered, but his brain had forgotten. A prey reflex.
Derek Auburn, heir to a great house and an A-rank mage, felt like a rabbit for the first time in his life. Eris stepped back. He turned to Ivy, who had stepped out onto the porch. He said her 3 words. "He's lying, that's all." Ivy looked at Derek, at Eris, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. A reception in honor of Derek Auburn was scheduled for the evening. The castle's great hall, candles, tapestries, a long table with food that Eris mostly didn't recognize. Duke Cardwin sat at the head of the table, thin and gray, but upright. He showed no weakness in front of a guest. Ivy sat to her father's right, a dark blue dress with silver embroidery, her hair styled more elaborately than usual. Eris didn't understand why. Hair is hair. Why twist it into elaborate structures? He was seated at the far end of the table, between 2 advisors who looked at him as if he were a stain on the tablecloth. Eris didn't mind. From here he could observe and smell. The hall reeked of dozens of scents: food, wine, sweat, perfume, fear, boredom, lust, greed. Every person at the table was an open book. They didn't know it. They thought the masks on their faces hid the truth.
Masks don't hide scent. Derek sat across from Ivy, smiling, speaking beautifully, compliments, promises, hints of an alliance. His voice was soft and enveloping. His scent was different. Beneath the perfume and confidence, Eris sensed calculation, cold, precise. Derek didn't want Ivy. He wanted Cardwin, the lands, the castle, the trade routes. Ivy was an afterthought, unpleasant, necessary. He planned to marry her, to claim the title, and then... Eris frowned. The scent was shifting. Beneath the calculation lay something else, deeper, darker. Anticipation, impatience. Like a beast that sees its prey trapped and waits for it to stop struggling. Derek didn't just want Cardwin. He knew Cardwin was dying, and he was waiting. Eris set down his spoon. He stood up. Everyone looked at him. He walked along the table, past the advisors, past the guards, straight to Derek. Ivy tensed. The Duke raised an eyebrow. Eris stopped next to Derek. Derek turned. The smile was still on his face. Eris leaned toward him, close, just like that morning in the courtyard. Derek didn't back away this time. He braced himself. He clenched his fist under the table. Mana hummed in his core, ready to strike. Eris didn't strike. He spoke, quietly, so that only Derek and Ivy nearby could hear. He said that Derek smelled like a scavenger, that he knew about the tunnels in the ground, that he was waiting for Cardwin to die so he could take the land without a fight, that his marriage proposal was not a union, but a burial. Derek turned pale. His smile didn't disappear, but changed, hardened, glassy. He asked quietly how the boy knew about the channels. Eris didn't answer the question. He straightened up, looked down at Derek, and spoke loudly so the whole hall could hear. He said that this man knows why Cardwin's land is dying, and he's keeping quiet. The hall fell silent. Derek stood up. His chair fell backward. Mana flared within his body. The air around him heated up. It crackled. He was an A-rank mage. Serious power, fire specialization. His hands glowed orange. He said he wouldn't tolerate insults from a savage without mana. Eris stood before him, barefoot, unarmed, without mana. Derek struck, quickly, without warning. A fireball the size of a human head, straight at Eris's chest. The ball flew, and a meter before Eris's chest it began to shrink, like a candle in a draft. The fire died out. The mana dissipated. It was sucked into the void, into a hole in his chest that couldn't be seen, but could be felt. The ball vanished, without a sound, no flash. It simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been there. Eris stood in the same spot. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Not even a hair stirred. He looked at Derek. Derek was looking at his hands. Empty. His best strike, the spell that pierced a stone wall, vanished, dissolved in a boy without mana. The hall was silent. The Duke slowly rose from his chair. His face was pale, but his eyes were alive. Alive for the first time in months. Ivy sat and looked at Eris, at his back, at the wyvern hide, at his bare feet on the stone floor. He stood before an A-rank mage and didn't even tense up. As one stands before the rain, unpleasant but not dangerous. Derek stepped back. His men at the table stood up, hands on their weapons. Eris didn't turn toward them. He looked at Derek, and for the first time since he'd been in the human world, his face truly changed. Not a smile, not a frown, something else. Something animalistic. The shadow of something ancient and immense flashed across his eyes like a fish beneath the surface of a lake. There, and then gone. Derek saw it, and his knees buckled. He didn't fall, but he staggered, and everyone saw it. The heir to the Auburn family, an A-rank mage, staggered from the gaze of a boy without mana. Eris turned away. He walked back to his seat, sat down, picked up his spoon, continued eating, as if nothing had happened. Because for him, nothing had happened. In the forest, such incidents happened every day. Whoever growls, you show that you're superior. He falls silent. You keep eating. Just another dinner. Derek left the castle an hour later. His escort rode in silence. 10 horsemen in silver armor, and not a single one looked back. Derek sat in the saddle, staring straight ahead. His hands were still trembling, not from fear, from emptiness. When the fireball vanished, he felt something, for a split second, as if he'd peered into a bottomless well, and the well had peered back at him. He wouldn't tell anyone about it, but he would remember it for the rest of his life. It was quiet at Cardwin Castle. The Duke had retired to his chambers. The advisors had dispersed. Servants were clearing the hall. Ivy stood by the window, gazing into the night. Eris approached. He stood beside her, silently, She didn't turn around. She said quietly that he could have warned her. Eris thought. About what? What he would do. He himself didn't know what he would do. He hadn't planned it. He had simply stood up and gone, because the stench of lies had grown too strong, and enduring it was physically unpleasant, like sitting next to rotting meat. At some point, you just stand up and remove it. Ivy turned toward him. She looked up at him. She was half a head shorter. For the first time, she didn't look at him as a savage, not as a tool, not as a mystery, but as a man who had stood between her and the one who wanted to devour her, and hadn't even realized he'd done anything special. She said thank you, quietly. One word. Eris nodded. Then he took something out of his pouch, small, shiny. He had been working on it for the last 3 nights, while everyone slept, in the smithy, alone. A necklace. A thin chain woven from the fibers of Leviathan's scales. In the center, a small crystal, cloudy, gray, plain. But Eris knew that his own breath was trapped inside the crystal. Emptiness. The heart of emptiness breathes emptiness. And this emptiness, upon contact with the core, creates interference, distortion. Anyone who tries to measure the wearer's mana will get a false result, any result they want. Eris placed the necklace on the windowsill. He said that now no one would know how much mana she had. She can be whoever she wants, strong, weak, anyone. She decides. Ivy looked at the necklace, small, ugly, roughly made. The most precious thing she had ever been given. She picked it up, put it on. The chain rested on her collarbone. The crystal lay on her chest, warm, pulsing, like a second heart. She lifted her head to say something, something worthy, something beautiful. But instead, tears streamed from her eyes. For the first time in front of a stranger, for the first time in 7 years, she cried and was angry that she was crying, and she couldn't stop. Eris was frightened. He didn't understand tears. He didn't understand why she was crying if he had done a good thing. In the forest, people don't cry over good things. He stood there, not knowing what to do. Then he remembered Mom, when he cried as a child. Mom would bring him a dead hare. It helped. Eris left the room. Ivy stayed by the window. 10 minutes later, he returned, with a dead hare, fresh. He'd caught it in the castle garden, with his bare hands, in 10 minutes. He placed it in front of Ivy. Seriously, solemnly, like an offering. Ivy looked at the hare. She looked at Eris. Tears were still streaming down her face, but the corners of her lips twitched. She covered her face with her hands and laughed. For the first time in her life, out loud, not a sarcastic chuckle, not a polite chuckle, real belly laughter. She was laughing and crying at the same time, standing by the window in the dark hall with a dead hare at her feet and a necklace of emptiness around her neck. Eris stood nearby and didn't understand a thing, but she didn't smell of sadness. She smelled of something new, of he couldn't name. Later he would find out. Later someone would explain that word to him, but for now he just stood there and waited for her to stop making those strange sounds. She didn't eat the hare. Eris was upset. Word of what had happened at Cardwin Castle spread within 3 days. An A-rank mage had attacked a boy without mana. The spell vanished. The mage fled. The boy finished his dinner. The story sounded like the ramblings of a drunken bard, but it was told by servants who had seen it with their own eyes, and by the guards who stood along the walls, and by the advisors who quietly passed it on to one another in the corridors. By the end of the week, this story was known throughout the Imperial Court. The head of the guild's analytical department received a second report. The first was from Lyndon, Class 0. This one was from Cardvin. He read it 4 times. Absorbs spells. Mana has no effect. Rank undetermined. The head of the department took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on, took them off again. Then he summoned a courier. 2 reports were sent out simultaneously, one to the palace, the other to the Cathedral of the Bright Mother. Cardinal Vasiliev Grout learned of Eris that very evening. He was sitting in his office on the top floor of the cathedral, an old man, thin, upright, eyes blue to the point of whiteness. The mana within him was an ocean. For 300 years he had drawn from the earth.
For 300 years he had gathered it, drop by drop. Every prayer from every parishioner in every church on the continent passed through the ritual network he had woven into the foundations of the cathedrals. People prayed to God. Mana flowed to Grout. He did not consider it theft. He considered it a service. God had given him a mission to protect the world. The world is weak. People are weak. Only he is strong enough to stand between chaos and order. For 3 centuries he believed this. For 3 centuries it was enough. Then he read the report. The heart of the void absorbs mana on contact. Grout laid the paper on the table. His hands were calm. His face remained unchanged. But inside, something shifted. For the first time in 100 years. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of death, the fear of the void. He knew what the heart of the void was. He was one of the few who knew. Ancient texts in the cathedral's basements described it. A vessel, a hole in the fabric of the world, the only thing capable of drinking it all. Absolutely everything, including his ocean. 300 years of work, millions of prayers, an ocean of mana, and one boy could drain it in a minute. Grout stood up. He walked to the window. The city below glowed with lights. Valaris, the capital of the empire. 2 million souls. His flock, his herd, his responsibility. He turned to the table, summoned his assistant, dictated an order, in a quiet voice, steady, as if dictating a recipe or a shopping list. The order was simple. Bring the boy from the forest to Valaris, alive, quietly, without attracting attention. If delivery is impossible, then eliminate him, quietly, without attracting attention. The assistant wrote it down, bowed, left. Grout remained alone. He sat down in a chair, closed his eyes. 3 centuries ago, he was a young priest who believed he could save the world. 3 centuries later, he was an old priest who feared a boy with a hole in his chest. Irony. He would have appreciated it if he remembered what irony was. While Grout was making plans from the Valaris Tower, Eris in Cardwin was busy with an important matter. He was learning to put on a shirt. Ivy insisted. After the incident with Derek, the Duke had officially declared Eris a guest of the Cardwin Ashton. A guest of the house cannot walk around in a wyvern's hide. It is a breach of protocol. Eris didn't understand what protocol was. Ivy explained. Rules that must not be broken in front of people. Eris asked when it was okay to break them when no one was watching. Ivy said yes. Eris said that in that case, they weren't rules, but a performance. In the forest, the rules are the same for everyone. You don't bite a member of the pack, ever. Not in front of anyone. Not a single one. Not in front of people. That's the rule. What people do is just a show. Ivy opened her mouth to object. She closed it. He was right. She knew he was right. It infuriated her. He put on a shirt, a white one, with buttons. He hated every single one. The buttons were small and slippery and pointless. Why cover the fabric with yet another tiny thing? Ties are easier. Even claws are easier. He spent 20 minutes buttoning the shirt. Ivy stood in the doorway and watched. Her face was stony, but the corners of her lips trembled. She held on, barely. When he fastened the last button and turned to her with the look of a warrior who had slain a dragon, she couldn't take it anymore. She turned away. Her shoulders were shaking. Eris decided she was cold. He took off his shirt and handed it to her. Ivy left the room and laughed in the hallway for 3 minutes. Eris put his back on. He spent another 20 minutes buttoning it up. By this point, a month had passed since Eris had left the forest. A month in the human world. He had learned to eat with a spoon, to wear a shirt, to speak in 5-word sentences, not to throw forks, not to sniff strangers without warning, not to bare his teeth when he smiled. The last one was the hardest. His face was used to baring his teeth.
A toothless smile seemed like cowardice to him. In the forest, a closed mouth means submission. Here, a closed mouth means politeness. He practiced in front of the mirror every evening. He stretched his lips, without showing his teeth. It looked creepy, as if a mask were trying to be a face. Ivy saw it once. She stood next to him. She showed him. Like this. Softer, don't stretch it. Just lift the corners, just a little. Eris repeated it. She shook her head. She took his chin with 2 fingers, gently. She adjusted it. Like this. Eris froze. Her fingers were cold and small and smelled of ink. He didn't move until she took her hand away. Then he looked in the mirror. The smile was crooked, but human. Human for the first time. He memorized the position of his muscles, like memorizing a stance for a punch, exactly, forever. Meanwhile, in Linden, Sarah Holloway was working, every day, from morning till night. A decoction made from the dead root of the silent tree, Eris's recipe. His blood was needed in the recipe. He'd left her a vial before leaving, a small one, dark glass, 20 drops, enough for 2 months. Sarah used it sparingly, drop by drop. Patients came every day. Word of the cure for wither had reached neighboring towns. People traveled to Linden from all over the duchy. Sarah treated them, silently, patiently, everyone. She slept only 4 hours a day. She was losing weight. She was turning pale, but she didn't stop. Because every patient she saved was someone her mother hadn't been able to save. Every time the potion worked and the patient took their first deep breath, Sarah felt the hole inside her grow a little smaller. Not from mana, from purpose. At night, she reread the herbarium Eris had given her, or rather a copy of it. She had copied every recipe in duplicate. She gave one to him, she kept the other for herself, and she added new entries every day, observations, dosages, reactions. She was building a new medicine, brick by brick, line by line, drop by drop of his blood. Sometimes at night, she would take out a bundle of silence herb, a gift from her mother. She would smell it, not brew it, she just sniffed it. The herb smelled of the forest, and of something else, something big and warm and infinitely patient. The scent of a creature that had nursed someone else's cub for 16 years. Sarah pressed the herb to her chest and fell asleep. For 4 hours. That was enough. In Cardvin, the end of the 5th week, what Eris had been waiting for since day 1 happened. A messenger arrived at the castle, from the Valerian Chancellery, an official invitation. His Majesty Emperor Veller requests that Eris Grimm come to the capital as a guest, as a subject of scientific interest, as a curiosity. The wording was polite. The messenger's aura was unmistakable. Fear, an order, urgency. This was no invitation, it was a summons. Ivy read the letter, reread it, set it on the table, looked at Eris. He was sitting in the corner, sharpening a knife made from leviathan scales. Bren had finished it 3 days ago. The knife was beautiful, black with a green sheen. Light, so sharp it cut through the air. Literally. If you ran the blade quickly, a visible line remained, like a crack in space. Bren cried when he gave it to Eris, not out of sadness, because he had created the best thing in his life and knew he would never make anything like it again. Ivy told Eris that going to the capital was dangerous. The church is there, the guild is there, everyone who wants to use or destroy him. Eris looked at the knife, then at Ivy. He said he needed to go to the capital. The answers are there. The channels that suck mana from the earth lead there. The one who steals life from the earth is there. Eris wants to find him and sniff him out. Ivy said it was suicide. Eris said he didn't know that word and that Sarah had used it too, and that he finally needed to find out what it meant. Ivy explained. Eris thought about it. Then he said no. He doesn't want to die. He wants Mom to stop being sick. To do that, he needs to find the one who's drying up the earth. The earth and the forest are connected. If the forest dies, Mom will die. If Mom dies, he'll burn everything. He said that last part calmly, without anger, like a fact.
Just as they say the sun rises in the east, if his mother dies, he will burn everything. It's not a threat, it's the weather. Ivy listened and understood that he wasn't exaggerating. The journey from Cardwin to Valaris took 12 days. Ivy traveled with him. She wasn't going to let him go alone. A savage in the capital without supervision is a disaster. The Duke objected. Ivy didn't listen. She was an heiress, but she had enough stubbornness in her for 3 dukes. On the 4th day of the journey, Eris sensed a new scent. They were being followed by 2 people, quiet, fast. They smelled of steel and poison and something sour. Professionals, not bandits. Bandits smell of greed. These smelled of work, like a blacksmith smells of coal. For them, killing was a craft. Eris told Ivy that they were being followed by 2 people. Ivy turned pale. She asked what to do. Eris said he'd handle it, at night. At night he didn't sleep. He lay by the fire. He waited. They came during the 3rd watch. 2 silhouettes, black against black, moving like shadows, almost silently. Almost. Silent to a human. To Eris, they stomped like a herd of boars. He was used to the silence of the forest. True silence, where SS rank beasts glide between the trees and the only sound is a heartbeat. These 2 were loud and slow and reeked of nerves. They approached the camp. Eris lay with his eyes closed. The assassin drew his blade, thin, coated in poison. 1 step, another. Eris opened his eyes. The assassin froze. Eris's eyes glowed in the darkness, not with magic, with biology, like a cat's eyes or a wolf's. 16 years in the forest's darkness had changed his eyes. They reflected the moonlight, 2 pale fires in the darkness. The assassin had seen a lot in his career. He had killed mages and warriors and aristocrats. He wasn't afraid of people. But what lay before him now was not a man. Before him lay something with the eyes of a predator and the body of a boy. And it looked at him the way a wolf looks at a mouse, with mild interest and absolute calm. The assassin took a step back. Professional instinct, not reason, instinct. The one that says, get out of here right now. The second assassin was bolder, or stupider. He threw a knife, quickly, precisely, straight for the throat. Eris turned his head. The knife flew past, by a hair's breadth. He didn't dodge, he simply turned his head. The way you turn when you hear an interesting sound, no faster and no slower than necessary. Then he stood up, slowly. He rose from the ground in a single motion, without using his hands, without effort, like a cat. The killers stood 10 paces away. Eris stood between them and the sleeping Ivy. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He didn't draw a knife. He just stood there. And that was the scariest thing of all. Because anyone who doesn't prepare for a fight is either a fool or so far above it that the fight doesn't exist for him. Eris exhaled, the same way he had in the ravine with the bandits, slowly, deeply, from the emptiness in his chest. The pressure fell over the clearing like a blanket, heavy, wet, cold. The first killer fell to his knees. His body gave out. His legs buckled on their own. His hands opened. The blade fell into the grass. The second one held his ground, for a second. Then he was thrown off balance. His body reacted to the emptiness in the only way it knew how, with rejection. Every cell screamed that something was wrong nearby, something that shouldn't be there, a hole in the world. Eris approached the first one. He crouched down, looked into his eyes, sniffed. A sour smell, poison on the blade, a professional, the order. Eris had seen this poison once before, in the forest. A poisonous weaver spider had made something similar, only weaker. This poison was concentrated, the work of a human. He asked quietly who had sent him. The assassin remained silent. Eris leaned closer. His face was a palm's width from the assassin's. His eyes glowed in the darkness. He asked again, in the same tone, quiet, calm,
almost gentle, like a mother asking a child where it hurts. The assassin spoke. He didn't want to. His body decided for him. His tongue began to move on its own, like Derek's legs when he swayed backward, an ancient reflex, submission. The body recognized the leader before the mind could object. The church, Cardinal Grout. The order was to bring the boy back alive. If that was impossible, then dead. Eris nodded. He stood up. He walked away. The killers lay on the ground, alive, unharmed. He hadn't touched them. Why would he? They were the ones sent, not the ones who decided. A hunting dog isn't to blame if its master points to a hare. The master is to blame. He returned to the fire. He lay down.
He closed his eyes. A minute later, he fell asleep. The killers lay there for another hour. Then they got up and left, silently, without looking back. Like Derek, like gangsters, like everyone who stood before Eris and realized that what stood before them was not what they had expected. In the morning, Ivy woke up and saw a knife in the grass, a thin one, with poison on the blade. She looked at Eris. He was eating porridge with a spoon and watching the sunrise. She asked what had happened during the night. Eris said 2 people had come. They'd left. Ivy picked up the knife by the handle, carefully. She knew poisons. She'd been taught at court. She recognized this poison. Siren's tear. Deadly if it enters the bloodstream. Takes effect in 3 heartbeats. The church's arsenal. She put the knife back, looked at Eris. He finished his porridge, licked the spoon, put it away in a pouch, stood up, looked at her, said it was time to go, as if nothing had happened. Because for him, nothing had happened. 2 people came and left. Just another night. In the forest, someone comes every night. Ivy realized one thing at that moment. She realized that this boy had lived for 16 years in a place where every night was like that, where every day someone came to kill, where sleep meant vulnerability and waking up meant you had survived again. And he hadn't become hardened by it. He hadn't become angry. He hadn't become cold. He had become the one who eats a bowl after an assassination attempt and carves spoons for children. She mounted her horse, and for the first time in 12 years, she didn't think about politics for a single second in the entire hour. She thought about him. On the 12th day, they saw Valaris, the capital of the Holy Empire, a city of millions, walls of white stone, towers reaching into the sky, the cathedral of the bright mother in the center, the golden dome glistening in the sun. Eris stood on a hill and watched. The city was enormous, larger than anything he had ever seen in his life, larger than his mother's cave, larger than the lake in the center of the forest, bigger than the sky, or so it seemed. It smelled. Millions of smells. People, food, metal, stone, mana. And beneath it all, deep like an underground river, the smell of the one who sat in the center and drank. Old, greedy, tired, familiar. Eris clenched his fist. The heart of the void responded. Dull, heavy, like a drum before battle. He looked at Ivy. She stood beside him, pale, tense, but upright. He told her he could sense him, the one who drinks. He is here, in the center, beneath the golden dome. Ivy tightened the reins. The cathedral of the bright mother, Cardinal Grout. She knew. She'd suspected it for a long time. Now she knew for sure. They descended the hill and entered the gates. Valaris was a labyrinth. The streets intertwined like the roots of a tree. People flowed through them like water. Eris walked, trying not to go mad from the smells. 1,000,000 people, 1,000,000 fears, 1,000,000 desires, all at once, all in his nose. In the forest, the smells were strong but few. Mom, the pack, prey, danger. 4 categories. Here there were 1,000 categories, and each one screamed louder than the last. He walked, clutching the little bag of salt. Salt smelled like home. Home meant peace. Peace meant he could think. He needed to think.
Ivy had organized everything. She was in her element. The capital was her battlefield. She knew who to write to, who to bribe, where to stay,
Who to avoid. They settled in the home of Cardwin's sales representative, a small mansion on a quiet street, 2 servants, a garden behind the house. Eris went out into the garden first thing. He knelt down. He placed his hands on the ground. He listened. There were channels here too, thicker than in Cardwin, closer to the surface. Mana flowed through them like blood through veins, all flowing in one direction, toward the center, toward the cathedral, toward him. The next day began what Ivy called diplomacy, and Eris called strange conversations with strangers. He was introduced at court, the throne room, columns, gold, the emperor on the throne, an old man in a robe, tired, smelling of medicine and fear. Not his own fear, someone else's. The fear of those standing behind the throne, pulling the strings. Eris stood before the throne, in a shirt, with buttons, which he hated, but Ivy said he had to, and he put it on, because Ivy asked, and the Pack's requests are law, even if the law is stupid. The Emperor looked down at him. Eris looked up at the Emperor. He didn't lower his head, didn't bow, didn't kneel. He didn't know he was supposed to do that. Ivy tugged at his sleeve. He looked at her. She gestured downward with her eyes. He looked down. The floor. Stone. Beautiful. He looked at Ivy again. She closed her eyes, took a breath, bowed herself, low. Eris watched, understood. People bow their heads before those they consider superior. He looked at the Emperor. Old, weak. He reeked of illness. Lower than him on any animal scale. Why bow his head? He didn't bow. The hall fell silent. The advisors exchanged glances. The guards tensed. Ivy mentally said goodbye to life. The Emperor. He looked at the boy for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, he smiled. A genuine smile, not a diplomatic one. He said that this young man was the first in 20 years who hadn't pretended. Eris didn't understand, but the tension in the hall eased. Ivy opened her eyes. She exhaled. The reception continued. Eris sat at the table and ate with a spoon. Aristocrats and mages and generals. Everyone was glancing sideways. Everyone was sniffing around, figuratively speaking. He was sniffing literally. An hour later, he knew more about every person at the table than their own wives did. This one is cheating. This one drinks. This one is sick and hiding it. This one hates her husband. This one is afraid of his boss. This one stole money and hasn't slept for 5 days. People were open books, every single one of them. Eris didn't understand why spies were needed when you could just sniff. Then what he had actually been called for happened. A small child began to cry. The son of one of the maids, hungry. His mother was working. The kitchen was far away. They wanted to carry the child out of the hall, quietly, so he wouldn't disturb anyone. Eris stood up. Everyone fell silent. He walked toward the kitchen. He passed a guard who didn't dare stop him. He entered the kitchen. There lay a prepared harpy carcass for tomorrow's feast. The carcass was worth as much as the estate. Eris looked at the carcass. He drew his knife, black, with a green sheen, and began to butcher it, with his bare hands and a blade made of leviathan scales. The cooks stood and watched. He moved like a master. No, like something beyond a master. He knew where every tendon was, every joint, every cutting point. He butchered the harpy the way an imperial chef cleans a fish. 10 minutes later, a cast-iron pot of broth was on the fire. Eris added herbs from the kitchen windowsill. The imperial chef had grown them for decoration. Eris used them for their intended purpose. The broth simmered for 5 minutes. Eris took it off the heat, poured it into a bowl, carried it into the hall. Walked past everyone, past the aristocrats with their mouths agape, past the guards with their eyes wide, past the emperor who had risen from his throne. He approached the maid, handed her the bowl for the boy. The maid took the bowl with trembling hands. The child stopped crying. The smell of the broth, warm, thick, meaty. The child reached for the bowl. The maid began to feed him.
Eris turned away. He walked back to the table. The king stood up. He said something sharp. Eris didn't understand the words, but he understood the scent. Indignation, insult. A harpy carcass was worth a fortune, and the savage used it to make broth for a servant's child. Eris stopped. He looked at the king. He didn't turn around. He only turned his head, over his shoulder. He spoke quietly, but so that the entire hall could hear. He was crying. In my pack, we don't cry from hunger. The hall was silent for a long time. Then something happened. A woman at the table,
The wife of some count, she clapped, alone. Then another, then a third, a fourth, half the hall, not everyone, but half. They clapped quietly, as if they were afraid, but they clapped. Because the barefoot boy in the crookedly buttoned shirt had just said what each of them knew but was afraid to say. A hungry child is more important than a dead harpy. It's simpler than mana and older than titles. Ivy sat at the table. She didn't clap. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She looked at Eris, and in that moment, something inside her clicked into place, like the last piece of a puzzle. Click. She understood. Not with her head, not with her heart, with something deeper. She realized she would follow him anywhere, not because he was strong, not because he was useful, because he was the only person in her life who did the right things without thinking about the consequences. And because of that, the consequences always turned out to be right. 3 days had passed since the reception. For 3 days, Eris had walked through Valiris, sniffing the ground. Every intersection, every park, every corner. The channels were everywhere. A network, huge, ancient, 300 years old. All the channels led to a single point, to the cathedral. Eris stood in the square in front of the cathedral and looked up. A golden dome, white walls, stained glass windows. Beautiful. It smells disgusting. Mana flowed beneath his feet, thick, fast, not upward toward the sun as it should, downward, under the stone, into the darkness. Someone was drinking from the earth and had no intention of stopping. Ivy found him in the square. She said she had news, bad news. The Hunters Guild had activated the contract, that one, the 1,000-year-old one, to destroy the evil of the devouring forest, an SSS rank contract. The reward? An entire principality. Activation meant that every hunter on the continent had received a notification. Target, Eris Grimm. Linked to the devouring forest, presumed SSS class, highest priority. Eris listened. Then he asked what a contract was. Ivy explained. People promise to kill someone for a fee, other people pay. Eris thought. Then he said that in the forest, it's called hunting, and the hunter has a right. But the prey has a right too, to escape, or to kill the hunter. That's fair. Ivy said this isn't the forest. Eris said nothing. He thought about his mom, about how she sleeps curled up around her tail, about how Tyr whines at night, about how the mana was draining from the forest every day, because of the man under the golden dome. He looked at the cathedral. It was time. That same evening, Eris left home alone. He didn't tell Ivy. He didn't tell anyone. He walked barefoot through the night streets of Velaris. He took off his shirt. He put on the pelt, for the first time in 2 weeks. The wyvern pelt wrapped around his shoulders like an old friend. It still smelled of mint. Sarah's scent wouldn't fade. He crossed 3 blocks. He passed a patrol. The patrol didn't notice him. He moved as he did in the forest, like a shadow, silently, odorless. He knew how to hide his scent. Mom had taught him to slow his breathing, to stop sweating, to become part of the darkness. In the forest, it was called the night skin. He reached the cathedral. The walls were high. The doors were closed. Guards stood at the entrance. Eris didn't go to the door. He went to the wall and climbed up. On the stone, with his bare hands, like in a gorge, like on the cliffs of the forest. His fingers found crevices. His feet found ledges. 2 minutes later, he was on the roof. The city lay below. Lights, stars, silence. Eris found a hatch. He opened it. He climbed down inside. The cathedral was empty at night. The columns receded into the darkness. The stained glass windows didn't let the moonlight through. Darkness. For Eris, this was familiar. He could see better in the dark than in the daylight. He went down the stairs, lower, deeper, beneath the cathedral, to where the manna flowed. Cellars, corridors. The stone changed. It grew older, more ancient. These basements were older than the cathedral, older than the city, older than the empire. Eris sensed time in the stone, 1,000 years, maybe more. He walked down the corridor and felt the heart of the void resonate in his chest, louder and louder, stronger and stronger. The manna around him thickened with every step. Down here it was like in the forest, thick, heavy, almost tangible. And it all flowed in one direction, toward the center. He reached the hall, a circular one, stone. A man stood in the center, an old man, thin, upright, white hair, blue eyes. The manna around him was visible. It glowed, golden, an ocean. A real ocean in the basement beneath the city. 300 years of prayers. 300 years of theft. All the pain of the earth, all the dead fields, all the sick children, all the dried up wells. It was all here, in one old man. Cardinal Vasilyev Grout was waiting for him. He knew Eris would come. He felt the void just as the void felt his ocean. Two poles, fullness and emptiness. They couldn't help but meet. Grout looked at Eris. Eris looked at Grout. Silence. Grout spoke first, quietly, wearily. He said he had been waiting for this moment for 3 centuries, that he knew that one day the one who would take everything would come, that he had prayed it wouldn't be in his lifetime. But prayers don't work when you yourself stand between them and God. Eris listened, sniffed. Grout smelled strange, not of evil, not of greed, of exhaustion, endless weariness, like mom when she's sick, like the earth when life is draining from it. Grout was tired. 3 centuries of tiredness. Eris said one sentence. Why? Grout closed his eyes, opened them, answered. Because someone has to. The world is weak. People are weak. The forest is advancing. The creatures are multiplying. The borders are cracking. Someone has to be the wall. He became the wall. A wall for 300 years. And the wall is tired. Eris listened. Then he shook his head. He said that Grout was wrong. The forest isn't advancing. The forest is retreating. The creatures aren't multiplying. The creatures are dying out. Because the manna is draining from the earth. Because Grout is taking it. The forest isn't dying from strength, from hunger. Mother isn't sick from old age, from the fact that the earth beneath her has been dried up completely. Grout listened. His face didn't change. But the scent changed. For the first time in 3 centuries, he smelled of doubt. A small one, like a crack in a wall. But a crack. Then Grout straightened up. The doubt was gone. Habit took its place. 3 centuries of habit. He said the boy didn't understand, that sacrifices were necessary, that order demanded a price, that he wasn't a villain, he was a guardian. Eris nodded. He said he understood. Mom is a guardian too. Mom guards the forest, but Mom doesn't steal from the earth to guard. Mom gives, every day, her manna, her strength, her sleep. Mom doesn't take, Mom gives. That's the difference. Grout was silent for a long time. Then he raised his hand. Manna flared around him. The ocean awoke. Golden light filled the hall, blinding, overwhelming. The air thickened. The stones creaked. Grout wasn't attacking. He was showing. Here is my power. Here are 300 years. Here is what you want to take. Eris stood in the center of that light, barefoot, in a wyvern's hide, with a necklace of teeth,
small, slender, like a candle in a hurricane. He took a step forward. The ocean of mana rippled, like the surface of water when a stone falls into it. The ripples spread from Eris to Grout. The golden light flickered. Eris took a second step, a third, a fourth. With every step, the ocean receded. Mana flowed from Grout to Eris, into the hole in his chest, slowly, like water down a drain. Grout felt it. For the first time in 3 centuries, he felt the mana leaving. Not from him. A drop, another, a trickle, a stream. He screamed, not from pain, from emptiness. That very emptiness. The one he had filled for 3 centuries with someone else's mana because he had lost his own long ago. Beneath the ocean was an empty old man. Beneath 3 centuries was a boy who feared the silence. And now the silence had come. Eris did not stop. Step, step, step. The ocean was emptying. Mana flowed into the heart of the void and through it, not remaining inside, passing right through, upward, through Eris's body, through the ceiling, through the stone, through the cathedral's foundation, into the sky. A gigantic pillar of light rose above Valaris, golden, visible for hundreds of kilometers. Mana was returning to the world, to the earth, to the air, to the roots and seeds and wells. Grout stood in the center of the hall. The light around him faded. The ocean receded, drop by drop, stream by stream. His skin aged before his eyes. His wrinkles deepened. His hair turned white until it was transparent. 3 centuries fell upon him in a minute. When the last drop of mana was gone, Grout stood before Eris as he had always been. An old man, ordinary, before his god, without a wall, without an ocean, without meaning. Eris stood before him, close. He leaned in. He sniffed his neck, just as he sniffed everyone, just as he sniffed Derek, just as he sniffed the killers, just as he sniffed Ivy and Seru. Grout smelled of weariness, not malice, not remorse. Weariness, endless, 3 centuries worth. Eris straightened up, looked the old man in the eyes, and said quietly, "You smell like Mom before bedtime." Weariness. Go to sleep. Grout stood there, a second, 2, 3, then his knees buckled. He fell. Not from a blow, not from magic, from relief. For 3 centuries he had held the wall. For 3 centuries he hadn't truly slept. And now someone told him to go to sleep. Simply, without trial, without execution, just go to sleep. Grout closed his eyes, and for the first time in 300 years, he fell asleep, truly, deeply, like a child. On the stone floor of the crypt beneath the cathedral, Eris stood nearby. Then he took off the wyvern's pelt. He covered the old man. He was cold on the stone floor, and cold is death, as his mother had taught him. Eris straightened up. He looked up. Light was still streaming through his body. A pillar of mana pierced the stone and shot up into the sky. Across the entire continent, the same thing was happening at that very moment. Dry fields turned green. Dead groves blossomed. Wells filled up. Children who had been gasping for air took their first deep breath. Beasts in the Devourer's forest raised their heads. Mana was returning. Fenrir Grimwald opened one eye in his cave. A growl rolled through the forest. The trees trembled. Good boy. The eye closed. Fenrir fell asleep again. But for the first time in a year, his sleep was peaceful. The pillar of light faded by morning, slowly, like a dying bonfire. Eris stood in the basement and felt the last drops of mana flowing through him into the sky. His body ached, not on the outside, from the inside. The heart of the void had let an ocean pass through it, and now hummed like a bell after a blow, low, heavy, endless. Eris sat down on the floor next to Grout. The old man was asleep, breathing evenly. For the first time in 3 centuries, his face was calm, not tense, not alert. Calm, like a child's. Eris sat and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just sat there. In the forest, after a great hunt, they sit and wait. The body must calm down. The blood must slow. Breathing must return. He waited. Morning was breaking above. The cathedral opened its doors. The priests entered and found that the cellars were open. They went down. They found Eris and Grout.
A shirtless boy wearing a necklace of teeth sat on the floor next to the sleeping cardinal, whom he had covered with a pelt. The priests didn't know what to do. They called the guards. The guards didn't know what to do. They called the captain. The captain looked at Eris. Eris looked at the captain. The captain decided to wait. A wise decision. An hour later, Ivy arrived. She had learned from the servants that Eris had left during the night. She hadn't slept until morning. She found him by a pillar of light. The whole city saw that light. The whole city was talking about it. Ivy went down to the basement. She saw Eris, pale, shirtless, without a pelt, wearing nothing but pants and a necklace. Grout was sleeping nearby. Emptiness all around. Literally. The mana that had filled these cellars for 3 centuries was gone. The stones were gray and cold and ordinary, just like stones. Ivy sat down beside him. She asked quietly what he had done. Eris answered, "I returned it." One word, returned. 300 years of theft, millions of prayers, an ocean of mana. Returned. Just like that. Not to himself, to the earth, from where it was taken back to where it belonged. Ivy was silent. Then she reached out, placed her hand on his shoulder, heavily, just as he had once placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. The same gesture. "I'm here. You're not alone. We'll hunt together." She'd learned that gesture from him, not with words, with her body. Eris looked at her hand, then at her. He nodded. By noon, the news had spread throughout the city. Cardinal Grout had been deposed, not arrested, not executed. Deposed. The Imperial Council convened in 2 hours, the fastest session in history. Evidence was in every stone of the basement, a ritual network woven into the foundation, channels running underground for hundreds of kilometers, records in the archives that Grout hadn't destroyed because he was certain no one would ever go down there. He was wrong. A boy who couldn't read but could smell went down. 3 days after Grout's fall, Eris stood in the square in front of the cathedral. Ivy stood beside him. Behind them, on the steps, stood people. A lot of people. They had come to look at the boy from the forest, at the savage, at the one who had brought back the mana. Eris didn't understand why they were standing there. He had done what he had to do. The land was starving. He had fed it. His mother was sick. He had removed the cause. Simple. Why were they looking at this? He turned to Ivy. He said he wanted to go home. Ivy asked which home. Eris thought, for a long time. Before, there was only one answer. The forest. Mom's cave. The smell of moss and blood and warm stone. Now the answer was different. Not because the forest had ceased to be home, because home had grown larger. Home was Mom and the pack. Mom in the forest, the pack. He looked at Ivy. The pack is here, part of the pack, another part in Linden. He hadn't met the third part yet, but he would. He knew that, just as one knows the smell of rain before it starts. Eris told Ivy they needed to go back to Linden, for Sarah, and then to the forest, to Mom. Mom has to meet the pack. It's the law. Ivy asked what law. Eris said Mom's. Mom said come back as a human and bring those you've chosen. Mom will sniff each one. If she approves, then they're part of the pack. If not, Eris didn't finish. He didn't know what would happen if Mom didn't approve. That option didn't exist in his mind. Mom will approve. Mom is smart. Mom will see what he sees.
that Sarah smells of kindness,
that Ivy smells of stubbornness and strength, that the world isn't as bad as it smells. The journey back took 12 days. The same 12, but different, lighter. The world smelled different. Mana was returning to the earth, slowly, drop by drop, but it was returning. The grass by the road was greener than a month ago. The trees stood straighter. The birds sang louder. Eris walked and listened. The world was recovering. Like the girl in Birchwood, like the land of Cardwin. Slowly, but surely. In Linden, Sarah was waiting for them. She stood at the door of her house, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She had worked non-stop for the entire month. Potions, patients, prescriptions, the clinic. She had built a clinic, a small one, 2 rooms, but it worked. The first of its kind, treatment without mana, with herbs and the knowledge of the forest. She saw Eris. He was walking down the street, in a shirt, with buttons, fastened crookedly, a wyvern pelt on his shoulder, a pouch of salt on his belt, the same one, and another. She saw it. He had changed. Not on the outside, deeper. His eyes were warmer, his step was gentler, his face moved differently, more human, less beastly. He was learning, every day, every minute. Eris saw Sarah, stopped, sniffed, mint, weariness, joy. And that scent he couldn't name, the one Ivy had when she laughed, the one the girl from Birchwood had when she first asked for food. Warm, light, like the sun smells when it warms the skin. Later he would learn that word, love. But right now he just stood there and sniffed, and he felt good. He walked over. He took a spoon out of his pouch, that very one, the crooked one, the one he'd carved for the girl from Birchwood. He'd carried it with him for 2 months, through Cardwin, through Valaris, through the gorge and the palace and the cathedral's crypt. He held out the spoon to Sarah, not for the girl, for her, because in 2 months he had realized one thing. A spoon shouldn't be made for a stranger, for someone you care about. Sarah took the spoon, small, crooked, wooden, with the scent of his palms ingrained in the wood over 2 months. She clutched the spoon with both hands, as one holds something priceless. A week later they left Linden, the 4 of them, Eris, Sarah, Ivy, and Master Bren, who had asked to come along because he wanted to see the creature whose fang had become a knife. Eris said that Bren wasn't part of the pack, but could be a guest. Bren agreed. On the way, they would meet Liane, and Yera, and Haun, and Seelin, one after another, each in her own way. Each would come for her own reason and stay for one. Because with Eris, the world became simpler, not easier, simpler, like in the forest. Eat, sleep, protect the pack, love those who are near. Don't betray, don't lie, don't be afraid. Simple rules for a complex world. By the end of the 2nd year, they stood at the edge of the Devourer's forest, 6 of them, Eris in front, behind him 5 girls, Sarah with an herb in her hands, Ivy with a necklace around her neck, Liane with knives on her back and a wooden tag with her real name in her pocket, Yera with a cross she no longer uses for blessing, but wears as a memento, Ha-In with her father's hammer on her back, Seelin with eyes that finally ceased to be empty. Eris looked at the forest, black crowns, the smell of moss, the smell of blood, the smell of home. He turned to his pack, looked at each one by one, for a long time. Memorizing. Like memorizing a stance for a strike. Precisely. Forever. Then he said, "Mom is waiting. She'll sniff each one. It will take time. Mom sniffs slowly." They entered the forest. The trees parted. A path appeared beneath their feet. The forest recognized him. The forest let them pass. An hour later they reached a cave, huge, dark, warm, the scent of moss and stone and something infinitely vast. Fenrir Grimwald lay at the entrance, his head resting on his paws, one eye open, golden, ancient.
wise, as big as Eris herself. The girls froze, even Liane, even Seelin. The creature before them was older than language, older than borders, older than fear. Eris stepped forward. He placed his palm on his mother's nose, a huge, wet nose the size of a table. Fenrir closed his eye, opened it. A growl, low, deep. The earth trembled. Eris smiled, crookedly, like a human, toothless, just as Ivy had taught him. Then he turned to the girls. He told them to come closer, one at a time. Sarah first. She stepped forward. Her hands were trembling, the herb pressed to her chest. Fenrir tilted his head. He sniffed, for a long time. The growl changed. It grew quieter, softer.
Sarah smelled of mint and kindness and the quiet grass. His gift. Fenrir recognized it. Approval. Ivy was next. She walked straight ahead, chin lifted. Her knees trembled, but her step was steady. Stubbornness overcame her terror. Fenrir sniffed her longer, much longer. Eris waited. He wasn't nervous. He knew that Mom would see what he saw. Stubbornness, strength, loyalty. A growl, a short one. Approval. Liane, Yera, Haun, Selin, each one in turn. Fenrir sniffed each one. He approved of each one, in his own way. He even touched Liane with his nose. He nudged her gently, the way you nudge an equal. Liane didn't fall. She didn't flinch. She pushed him back in response, a fist to the nose, gently. Fenrir snorted. It was laughter. An ancient SSS rank beast laughed. The trees within a kilometer radius lost their leaves. When everyone had been approved, Eris stood among his own and looked at his mother. Fenrir lay there and looked at him. 2 golden eyes, 1 little boy. 16 years between them, a whole lifetime. Eris leaned down. He rested his forehead on his mother's nose. He closed his eyes. Mom, I'm back. I brought the pack. I've become human. Almost. I've mastered the spoon. Not the fork, but I'm working on it. A murmur. Long. Warm. The earth trembled, not from strength, from tenderness. Eris straightened up, turned to his pack. 6 faces, 6 scents, 6 stories that are now one. He opened his mouth and uttered the first joke of his life. I'm tired. Who's going to carry me home? Silence. A second. 2. Liane silently offered her back. Ivy laughed, out loud, for the second time in her life. Sarah cried, quietly, happily. Yera folded her hands and whispered that something old and warm. Haun took out her notebook and began calculating the expenses for the return trip. Celine looked at the sky, then at them, then rolled her eyes, and said one word. Pack. She paused, added, Let's go home. And they went, the 7 of them, back from the forest, into a world that had become a little kinder, a little greener, a little quieter. Because one day, a barefoot boy emerged from the black thicket with a little bag of salt and asked where he could buy salt, and the world would never be the same again.